You step outside on a night that feels unusually quiet. No glowing orb floats above. No soft silver wash over rooftops. No tides pulling. No wolves howling. No lovers swearing secrets in moonlight. Just an empty sky, endless cold, and littered with distant stars. You stare into that dark expanse, and for a moment something ancient stirs. A question you don't know how to ask begins to form. Where's the moon? What if it wasn't always there? What if long before it took its seat above Earth, something else ruled the skies? Something older, stranger, and infinitely more terrifying. Tonight, we're going to explore a reality that might have existed before the moon ever rose above our heads. A time when civilizations flourished under a different rhythm. No lunar months, no eclipses, no nightlight in the sky. Just a deeper, darker version of Earth. And in that version, civilizations rose. They built temples and towers. They decoded stars and sang with the sea. They touched something beyond time. And then they disappeared. You probably won't survive this, at least not with your current worldview intact, because the stories we've dug up are more than bedtime tales. They come from myths, science fiction, speculative archaeology, and ancient fragments humanity wasn't supposed to remember. From shining sky beings to underwater cities, from giants who became mountains, to reptilian scientists who went underground after we ruined their planet. These are not just stories. They're warnings, breadcrumbs, clues. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. Midnight in Minnesota, 3 a.m. in Cape Town. Let's build a constellation of sleepy minds across the world. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started on tonight's journey together. The sky is empty, the moon hasn't arrived, but they have. You're standing at the edge of a forgotten coastline. The wind smells like salt and memory. Sand stretches out beneath your feet, but it's not quite sand. It's crushed stone ruins ground into dust by time. You shift your weight, and beneath you is a whisper. Soft and stubborn, Atlantis was never lost. It was erased. Everyone's heard the name. Atlantis. Say it aloud, and it almost hums. The mythical island swallowed by the sea. A paradise of technology, wisdom, and symmetry shattered in a single night. You might even remember the details: concentric circles of land and water, shining temples, a vast navy, a tragic fall. It's the world's most famous lost civilization, and we owe it all to Plato. Around 360 BCE, the Greek philosopher sat down and wrote two dialogues, Timaeus and Critias. These weren't just abstract musings. He claimed he was documenting a story passed down from Egyptian priests to the Athenian lawmaker Solon, eventually landing in his own lap like a grenade wrapped in metaphor. According to Plato, Atlantis fell 9,000 years before his time. That's over 11,000 years ago. Now pause. Do some quick math. That's before the pyramids, before the Sumerians, before agriculture, before writing. Atlantis, according to Plato, existed in a time that shouldn't have had cities, temples, or fleets, and yet it did. That's weird enough. But it gets stranger, because if Plato's numbers are right, and that's a big if, but stick with me, we're talking about a civilization that rose to power during the last ice age. Back then, sea levels were about 300 feet lower than they are now. The continents wore different coastlines. Vast stretches of what are now ocean were once dry plains. And when the glaciers melted, entire regions drowned. So what if Atlantis wasn't just a myth? What if it was a real civilization built in a place now submerged? What if that single day and night of misfortune Plato described wasn't allegory but memory? A cultural trauma passed down like an old scar. And what if that scar is older than we thought? Now, here's the really uncomfortable bit. Some thinkers, mystics researchers, late-night YouTube spiralers suggest that Atlantis may have existed before the moon. Yes, before the moon. It sounds absurd, but let's unpack it gently. Several ancient traditions hint at a time when the moon did not yet hang in the sky. The Zulu of South Africa speak of a time before the moon came. The Arcadians, according to Aristotle, were older than the moon. Some Native American stories describe a sky with only stars, no white orb to keep time. And in those stories, the world feels different, less rhythmic, less restrained, less watched. Of course, modern science says the moon is about 4.5 billion years old, formed from a cataclysmic collision between Earth and a Mars-sized body called Theia. The debris from that impact coalesced into the moon, stabilized Earth's tilt, and gave us tides. That's the textbook version. But myths don't run on textbooks. They run on resonance. What if these stories aren't about the literal moon? What if they're metaphors, symbols? For a time before something changed, our relationship to memory, time, and truth. What if Atlantis was part of a world that operated under a different sky? A sky unburdened by lunar cycles. Now, you might be wondering, if Atlantis really existed, where's the proof? That's the tricky part. When sea levels rose, they would have erased everything cities' artifacts libraries. Salt water and silt are terrible for preservation, but scattered around the globe are hints like fingerprints on fogged glass. Massive megalithic ruins lie underwater off the coasts of India, Japan, and the Bahamas. The Yonaguni Monument, an enormous step formation submerged off Japan's Ryukyu Island, still ignites fierce debate. Natural or man-made historians still debate whether its sharp angles and terraces are the result of ancient engineering or geology playing tricks. Then there's the Bimini Road rectangular limestone blocks off the coast of the Bahamas that look suspiciously like an ancient harbor. None of these ruins scream Atlantis in bold font, but they whisper, and whispers in this story are currency. Because Atlantis is more than a place, it's a gravitational center, a myth that pulls others into its orbit. It's the connective tissue between flood stories, lost knowledge, and the haunting feeling that history is a shattered mirror missing a few sharp pieces. That brings us to the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. It proposes that around 10,800 BCE, a comet or multiple fragments slammed into Earth, triggering massive floods, fires, and a rapid climate shift. It's controversial, but if it happened, it fits perfectly into Plato's timeline. Imagine this: a civilization, highly advanced, for its time, maritime, mathematically literate, obsessed with stars and cycles, thriving on coastal plains during the late Ice Age. Then boom, skyfire, tsunamis, earthquakes, and a new era begins. One with no memory. One where oral traditions turn to myth. One where the moon watches over a scarred Earth like a silent warden. And what if Atlantis wasn't our ancestor? What if they weren't even on our branch of the evolutionary tree? What if they were something else entirely? Something parallel, older, different, deleted from the record. Not by accident, but by design. There's a reason Atlantis keeps showing up in books, dreams, documentaries, and deep dives into Google Earth. It's not just about lost cities. It's about the feeling that we're not the first. That beneath every stone circle, every pyramid, every myth of a golden age lies an echo. You forgot something, and when you forget something long enough, it begins to remember you. So you stand there barefoot on the beach of a vanished continent. The wind shifts. The stars blink like old memories. And though the moon isn't in the sky yet, you feel it coming. A soft gravity, a reset, a veil. Atlantis didn't sink, it faded. And the tide's starting to pull again. You kneel by a shoreline that doesn't exist anymore. The sand beneath your fingers pulses faintly, like it remembers something. A hum, maybe. Or the echo of a name whispered across thousands of drowning years. It doesn't say Atlantis this time. It says something stranger, Mu. Or maybe Lemuria. They're not the same, not exactly, but they might be dreaming of the same thing. Long before Atlantis earned her reputation as the gold standard of sunken cities, there were tales of even older lands, vast continents in the Pacific and Indian Oceans, places where time moved differently, where giants lived serene and wise, not the club-wielding kind, but the telepathic kind, where crystal technology vibrated with consciousness, where no one needed to speak because they simply understood. Sounds lovely, right? Except, of course, that they all drowned. Let's start with Mu. The name was first whispered by a 19th century French priest who misread some Mayan texts. It was a translation error, a linguistic faceplant, but it took off like wildfire. Suddenly, Mu was everywhere. A lost Pacific continent home to Queen Mu and Prince Ko, who may or may not have invented enlightenment. Then came Augustus Le Plongeon, an amateur archaeologist with the confidence of a man who believed the Mayans were Atlantean colonists. He tied Mu to Atlantis, to Egypt, to any ruin that hadn't yet been given a backstory. What he lacked in evidence, he made up for in enthusiasm. Then Lemuria. It began as a serious scientific theory, believe it or not. In the mid-1800s, zoologists noticed that lemurs were found in Madagascar and India, but not in Africa or the Middle East. One guy proposed that maybe a land bridge once connected these distant lands. He called it Lemuria. Geology eventually crushed that theory like a soda can, but not before spiritualists ran off with it. By the time Helena Blavatsky got her hands on it, Lemuria had become a mythical civilization of androgynous egg-laying giants with four-armed psychic powers and a fondness for astral projection. Naturally, historians still debate whether these myths were sincere beliefs, fever dreams, or spiritual science fiction. But that's not the point, is it? These weren't just tall tales. They were yearning. They were memory dressed in robes, trying to speak through a world that had forgotten how to listen. Because here's the thing, Mu and Lemuria keep showing up. Not just in dusty theosophy books, but in dreams and trance sessions, in sacred sites scattered across Polynesia, Easter Island, India, and California's Mount Shasta. They pop up in crystal shops and psychedelic rituals in whispers from the edges of consciousness. You don't believe in them exactly, but you recognize them. That strange déjà vu when you see a spiral carved in stone or feel something shift inside your chest near ancient water. What if Mu and Lemuria weren't places, but phases? States of consciousness humanity passed through before falling asleep under the moon's pull. Before time became a thing we could measure. Before forgetting was built into the structure of the sky. According to the lore, these civilizations weren't undone by war or conquest, but by a shift, a fall, a cosmic puberty. Something changed. Maybe the orbit of the Earth, Maybe the frequency of the sun. Maybe the appearance of that pale satellite up above. The moon didn't just rise into view. It locked something down. Memory. Vibration. The ability to resonate with the divine without needing a priest or a payment plan. Mu didn't fall with a bang. It sank slowly, like an old man walking into the sea robes trailing behind him. Lemuria didn't burn. It faded like a song hummed under your breath until you forget why you're humming. But they didn't vanish completely. There are those who believe the Lemurians didn't die. They retreated, not into space, into Earth, into places like Mount Shasta, a snowy volcano in Northern California that, according to legend, hides a Lemurian city called Telos, a shining crystal metropolis humming at a higher dimension. If you climb the mountain and meditate at just the right frequency, they say you might feel it, or hear it, or slip sideways into it. You scoff, but only a little, because something about it feels true. Not factual truth, and fact aren't always friends, but familiar. Maybe you've felt it before, in a dream of swimming in air, of speaking without sound of cities glowing beneath the ocean's black skin. Maybe you've seen a pattern somewhere, a spiral again, and felt your bones lean toward it. Because here's the weirdest part the myths say these people knew. They foresaw the fall. They understood that the world was about to get heavier, denser, noisier, and so they chose their exit. Some say they ascended, becoming pure vibration. Others say they entered the earth literally. Some believe they allowed themselves to die willingly, like a song ending on the right note. And a few stayed behind, not as flesh, but as memory, as guardians, as dreams. And always, always, there's the moon. In Lemurian lore, the moon isn't just a rock. It's a veil, a symbol of forgetting, a mechanism that locks vibration into matter, a reflection that doesn't just mirror, it masks. Before the moon, everything was clearer. After the moon, everything became a story told secondhand, with the ending swapped and the gods recast. Mu, Lemuria, different names, same ache, so you close your eyes. You lie back into soft grass that grows where the sea once stood. Above you, the stars wheel slowly. The moon isn't here yet, not in this memory. You can feel the earth breathing slow, deep, unhurried, the way it used to breathe before calendars, before clocks, before cages shaped like weeks and workdays. You can almost hear it, the song, not lyrics, not notes, just resonance, the low hum of a world that once was not ruled but remembered, where every stone vibrated with intention, where people didn't build temples, they were the temples. And then slowly, like a coin dropping into water, the moon rises, and the hum fades. The song forgets itself. You forget what you were listening to, but part of you still remembers. That's why you're here after all. You open your eyes beneath the moonless sky, and the ground feels old. Older than bones, older than trees, like it remembers feet that walked here long before yours, feet that weren't exactly human. Something scaly, something calculating, something cold-blooded. You shuffle forward slowly and try not to imagine it watching you from beneath the soil. But it is. This is the land of the Silurians, not a tribe, not a legend whispered in torchlight, a theory, a possibility so unsettling it makes your skin itch. It goes like this. What if humanity isn't Earth's first intelligent species? What if millions of years before us, before mammoths, before saber-toothed cats, before the first primate blinked into a sunbeam, there was something else, a civilization, a species, advanced Industrial, reptilian, yes, reptilian. It started as science fiction. Doctor Who introduced the Silurians in 1970, a race of intelligent lizard people who ruled the planet before mammals were even a thing, only to retreat underground into cryogenic hibernation when they saw the asteroid coming. They planned to wake up when Earth was safe again, and wake up they did. In the show, they emerge furious because while they slept, we took over, built cities, invented traffic, lit the skies with satellites and pollution. From their point of view, we're the invaders, squatters building condos in their old backyard. It was a clever twist. But the idea didn't die when the credits rolled. It slithered out of fiction and into the mind of a few very curious scientists. In 2018, two actual researchers, Gavin Schmidt and Adam Frank, published a paper exploring what they called the Silurian hypothesis, a thought experiment, not proof, but a question. If a technologically advanced civilization had existed on Earth millions of years ago, would we even be able to tell? Spoiler, probably not. Think about it. Over millions of years, tectonic plates shift. Oceans rise and fall. Erosion devours cities. Fossils degrade. Entire continents get recycled back into magma, like forgotten emails, into a digital void. After a few million years, all that might remain is a blip in carbon isotopes. A trace of industrial activity. A chemical wink in the rock record. And even that could be dismissed as natural, which means if there was a civilization before us, we may never know, unless they left something behind, and some believe they did. There are stories, whispers of reptilian beings who ruled before humans. You've heard the conspiracies: Hollow Earth, underground cities, government shapeshifters with scaly skin and cold eyes. Most of it sounds ridiculous until you start noticing how many ancient cultures describe similar entities. The Nagas of Indian lore, serpent deities, who dwell beneath the earth, wise and dangerous. The Anunnaki of Sumer, gods of the deep who meddled with human genetics. The feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerican myth creator, destroyer teacher. Even the Bible hints at something reptilian and persuasive hanging around in Eden. Coincidence maybe, or maybe it's memory, leaking through cracks in the collective subconscious. Memory of a race that ruled Earth before the moon cast its first shadow. Reptilian beings with technology tuned to Earth's natural frequencies. A global system of underground cities. Energy drawn from magnetism, not combustion. A civilization that didn't pollute, they resonated. And when something went wrong, when climate shifted, or the moon arrived, or a comet bruised the planet, they didn't die out. They went down into the crust, into deep chambers lined with crystal, into hibernation. And maybe, just maybe, they're still there. Some say they monitor us, watch us from below, judge us. Not because they hate us, but because we remind them of themselves, their own fall, their own arrogance, their own fatal belief that they'd mastered the planet. You see, the legend goes that the Silurians didn't just fall because of an asteroid. They fell because of something internal, a civil war, a technological experiment gone wrong, a climate disaster they triggered and couldn't stop. Sound familiar? Historians still debate whether civilizations are fated to collapse under the weight of their own progress. The Silurian myth leans hard into that idea. That intelligence doesn't guarantee wisdom. That the smarter you are, the faster you build your own trap. And the weirdest part, you might already be seeing them. There are reports, fringe, but persistent, of strange beings spotted in deep cave systems. Glimpses during mining accidents, creatures with luminous eyes and vertical pupils, military bases built near odd magnetic anomalies, whispers that underground explosions aren't about testing weapons, they're about keeping something in. Now look, maybe it's nonsense. Maybe it's just a really creative metaphor for fear of extinction, for climate change, for the creeping anxiety that we're screwing it all up. But maybe it's not. Maybe when you look at a lizard and it stares back a little too long, maybe that's not your imagination. Maybe that's history staring through the glass. And here's the most haunting idea of all. What if they weren't the first either? What if they were a reset? What if Earth has gone through this before? Again and again, civilizations rising, collapsing, burying themselves in myth, fossil, and shadow. And each time, the moon watches. The moon keeps time. The moon resets the clock. Tick, collapse, tick, collapse. And now it's our turn. You feel it, don't you? The hum of old systems restarting. The paranoia creeping in around the edges of rational thought. The sense that history doesn't just repeat, it recycles. You walk through a field. The sky is still moonless, but the ground feels hollow. There's something beneath it, not stone, not metal, something older. You listen, and if you're very, very quiet, you can almost hear them breathing. The wind is colder now. You don't remember when it changed, but you feel it. The air has teeth. It nips at your neck like something trying to remind you that you're being watched. Not from the ground, from below the ice. You're in Antarctica, though you don't remember arriving. There's no sun, only pale gray sky and white, endless ground. But somewhere beneath the frozen crust, deep and ancient, lies something more terrifying than forgotten civilizations or moon conspiracies. Something inhumanly old. Something calculated. You shuffle toward a jagged ridge of ice. It doesn't look natural. Angles too sharp. Geometry that your eyes don't want to understand. Your breath clouds in front of you, and somewhere faint but real you hear a hum. Not mechanical, not organic. Something between. Welcome to the domain of the elder things. You might recognize the name from H.P. Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness, a novella most people file away under creepy octopus aliens and leave it at that. But if you read between the tentacles, you'll find something eerily familiar. In the story, explorers uncover a lost city beneath the Antarctic ice, massive alien geometrically impossible. Built not by human hands, but by ancient extraterrestrials who came to Earth long before us. The elder things. They were scientists, engineers, biologists. They didn't worship. They calculated. They didn't destroy. They experimented. They created life-first simple organisms, then complex ones, and eventually, us, by accident. It was never meant to happen. According to the tale, the elder things didn't just build a civilization, they built biology. Earth was a lab, the oceans petri dishes, evolution a self-regulating project, humanity a side effect, mold that grew under the microscope. And when their creations rebelled, shape-shifting horrors called the Shoggoths, they lost control. The experiment fought back. The elder things were forced to retreat deeper and deeper into the earth until they vanished. Now most people will tell you it's just fiction. Cosmic horror, metaphor. But Lovecraft was onto something, not just in what he said, but in how he said it. Because the way he described that Antarctic city with its perfect stone corridors, impossible dimensions, and symbols, no human language could replicate. It matches what some explorers have actually reported in the real world. Yes, real world. In 2002, a science team drilling ice cores in Antarctica stopped publishing updates without explanation. In 2018, rumors swirled that satellite imagery had captured strange structures beneath the ice, geometrically aligned. Even the Nazis had expeditions here in the 1930s, allegedly searching for hollow Earth entrances and ancient power sources. Historians still debate whether these expeditions were serious or just ideological fantasy. But they did happen. And that alone is enough to make you wonder, why would anyone come here willingly? Unless they knew something. Imagine this, a pre-moon Earth still young and chaotic, spinning wilder than it does now. A perfect lab. Into this chaos descend the elder things, not as invaders, but as architects. They shape coastlines, seed cells in the oceans, tune the magnetic field. They don't rule Earth. They design it. The way a programmer writes code for a game they'll never play, but something goes wrong. Maybe it's a mutation. Maybe it's the arrival of the moon, locking frequencies, twisting timelines, compressing thought into narrative. The elder things lose control. Their creation's biological tools, meant to serve, begin evolving, thinking, resisting, and so they fall, not in a dramatic war, not in fire, but slowly, deliberately, retreating underground into stasis, into the deepest cold where time can't touch them. You think that's all fantasy, until you realize Antarctica is the only continent without indigenous human habitation, the only place no ancient culture ever claimed. No oral traditions, no ruins, just ice. Like something made sure no one got too close. Because what's beneath might not be dead, just dreaming. Some believe the elder things encoded their knowledge into the very geometry of the planet. That pyramid stone circles and sacred architecture around the world mimic their designs because they resonate with some ancient planetary frequency. A blueprint left behind, not to control us, to warn us, and others think they'll return, not with fire or machines, but with reminders, echoes, symbols, dreams, sudden surges of genius in mathematics art or quantum biology that seem to come from nowhere, little pulses in the human psyche, waking up memories that don't belong to us. What if you felt it? That moment, you stood in a dark room and were sure, absolutely sure, that something old was near. The way your stomach drops in an unfamiliar cave. The way certain patterns make your skin crawl, even if you can't explain why. It's not fear, it's recognition. And if you're still not convinced, let's circle back to Antarctica. Recently, scientists discovered massive subglacial lakes beneath the ice, some of which haven't been touched by light or atmosphere in millions of years. They're warm, liquid, alive with strange microbes no one's ever seen. Life in isolation, ecosystems that don't belong to us. They drilled into one of them. The probe returned anomalous readings, complex structures. Then, nothing. The feed went dead. You tell yourself it's just equipment failure. You tell yourself that nothing breathes down there, but the hum is back, and now it's louder. You press your hand to the icy ground. It's vibrating, not randomly, rhythmically, as if something beneath is still running, still monitoring, still calculating, still waiting. And you wonder, what would the elder things fear? Because if even they had nightmares, what must those have been? You feel it before you see it, the light, Not the usual cold shimmer of moonlight, because tonight there's no moon above you, just a soft golden glow seeping across the horizon like the memory of sunlight stretched out too long. The wind here doesn't howl, it hums. Not a song exactly, but a kind of patience like the air itself is waiting for you to remember something. You turn north, not because someone told you to, but because the light comes from there. Welcome to Hyperborea. It's a name that drifts through ancient Greek texts like a mirage. A land beyond the north wind Hyper, meaning beyond, and Boreas being the god of that icy current. But Hyperborea wasn't just cold. It wasn't tundra or glacier or Arctic wasteland. It was paradise. The Greeks believed this land lay far to the north, where the sun never set and life never ended. No war, no hunger, no decay. The Hyperboreans didn't build empires. They didn't need to. They lived in harmony with themselves, with the gods, and with the earth. Apollo himself, the golden god of light and music, was said to retreat there every 19 years. Not Olympus, not Mount Parnassus, but Hyperborea. That's where he went to rest, to remember. And the Hyperboreans, they were tall, luminous, and in some versions, not exactly human. Some said they had no gender. Others claimed they reproduced by merging light-knot bodies. Some whispered they were born from sound. You shuffle along a jagged ridge, crunching frost underfoot, and think about that. Beings born from sound. What would that even look like? You don't get an answer. But the wind changes pitch like it's thinking. The ancient historian Diodorus Siculus claimed Hyperborea was real. He described it as an island in the far north, where the stars never set. Modern scholars brush him off. Poetic exaggeration, they say. But what if he wasn't wrong? What if he was describing a world during the Holocene thermal maximum about 10,000 years ago, when parts of the Arctic were actually green forested, fertile? What if Hyperborea existed during that window? And what if it didn't just disappear, but ascended? The Hyperboreans weren't like us. They didn't build with stone. They didn't farm or mine. They lived in resonance. Their cities, if you could call them that, were grown from light and intention. Geometry you can't sketch. Frequencies you can't hear, only feel. Their technology wasn't external. It was them. Their thoughts bent wind. Their breath bent time. And then came the fall. Not a war, not a flood. The moon. That's what some esoteric traditions say. The arrival, or perhaps activation of the moon, marked a cosmic shift. Before the moon, the Earth vibrated at a higher frequency. Everything was brighter, more fluid. Time wasn't measured. It was felt. But the moon brought rhythm, cycles, decline. It ushered in duality light and dark life and death before and after. And Hyperborea didn't belong in that world, so they left, or phased out, or withdrew into some other slice of dimension where the moon's pull can't follow. Historians still debate whether Hyperborea was myth or metaphor, a symbolic utopia, or an ancient memory wrapped in dream logic. But the pattern persists. You find it in Celtic stories of the Sidhe, luminous people who lived underground after the mortal world grew too loud. You see it in the Norse tales of elves and light beings who faded as the age of men began. Even the Nazis chased Hyperborea, twisted the myth, of course, into something grotesque and ideological, but they believed it was real. They sent expeditions north in search of its remnants, which should disturb you more than it does, because the question remains, what was it they were looking for? And what if some version of it still exists? Some say the Hyperboreans didn't vanish. They wait, not in caves, not in ice, in magnetic anomalies, in dreams, in music that makes you cry for no reason. In the aurora borealis, the northern lights dancing across the sky like DNA trying to remember its shape. You stop walking, the snow glows softly around you, and you realize something: it's not cold. Not anymore. The wind has stopped, and there's a warmth not of temperature, but of presence. Like something ancient has noticed you. Not with eyes, but with awareness. You're being held, and you hear something, not words, but harmony. A chord so pure, it vibrates the base of your spine. Not terrifying, not invasive, just true. Like a frequency you forgot you were missing. Like the sound of your own name spoken by a planet that loved you once. Then as gently as it came, it fades. You exhale. You hadn't realized you were holding your breath. And you think, if the Hyperboreans still exist, they're not waiting to return like conquerors. They're waiting for us to catch up, to resonate, to remember how to vibrate at the same frequency, to outgrow the moon's control, not destroy it, just step beyond its reach. And if that sounds like science fiction, that's fine. Most truth starts as bedtime stories anyway. You take one more step north, and for just a second, your shadow glows. The light fades behind you now, like a page turning gently in the sky. You descend from that strange northern memory, your boots crunching down into mist. Thick, low velvet mist. It moves across the ground like a living thing, wrapping around rocks, curling against trees, rising from the soil, not like steam, but like breath. The forest is old here. Older than your words for old. The leaves are watching. The moss under your feet feels like memory foam for another kind of foot. You've entered Ireland, but not the Ireland of maps or tourist brochures. This is a different layer. One you won't find on road signs. One that sings when no one is listening. Because this is where the Tuatha de Danann landed. You've heard of them, maybe. Usually dressed up in green robes and fairy wings. Cute. Misleading. The Tuatha weren't fairies. They weren't even quite gods. They were something else. And their story doesn't begin with Earth, it begins in the mist. They arrived suddenly, so the legends go. Their ships didn't sail on water, they sailed through air. The sky darkened. Fog rolled in. And when it cleared, there they were, gleaming, tall, armored in strange metals, eyes bright like stars caught in a net. The locals didn't know what to make of them. Some say they brought war. Others say they brought wisdom. But all agree they brought something the world had forgotten. They came bearing gifts, or tools depending on who you ask. 4 sacred treasures, a sword that never missed a spear, that guaranteed victory, a cauldron that never left anyone hungry, and a stone that cried out beneath the feet of true kings. Not metaphor, objects, technology. Historians still debate whether the Tuatha de Danann were real people, mythologized over time, or myths later humanized into history. But the layers are suspiciously deep. In some tellings, they came from the skies. In others, from a place called Tir Nanog, the land of eternal youth. A realm of immortals. A plane just sideways of ours, and perhaps, most intriguingly, some say they came from before the moon. You pause in the mist and listen. There's a rhythm here, not unlike a breath. The land inhales and exhales slowly. The Tuatha would have felt it. They were said to be attuned to Earth's frequencies in ways we no longer understand. They didn't use magic. They were magic. They bent energy. They communicated with trees. They tracked the movement of stars not just across the sky, but through the soul. But their time didn't last. After they arrived, they fought battles most famously against the Fomorians, a chaotic seaborne race of twisted beings. The Tuatha defeated them barely, but not long after, they were defeated themselves by the Milesians, mortal humans from the Iberian Peninsula. Let that sink in. The Tuatha, these luminous hyperbeings, lost to regular humans. The myths are vague on the details, but they say the Tuatha didn't die. They withdrew. They stepped sideways into the Side, the hollow hills, into the other world, into dream space. Some say they still live there, beneath fairy mounds and dolmens. That if you walk the Irish countryside at twilight, you might hear laughter from the hills, or catch a flicker of light beneath the roots of a tree that shouldn't be glowing. The church later recast them as devils or fae. The Victorians shrank them into pixies and mischievous tricksters. But in the oldest tales, they were shining, ageless, wise, and sometimes sad, because they remembered the sky before the moon. That's a thread barely clinging to the edge of the myth. But it's there, in the whispers. The idea that the Tuatha came from a place unbound by lunar time, where cycles didn't dictate decay, where consciousness flowed unbroken. Then the moon appeared, and the veil dropped. The Tuatha withdrew not because they were defeated, but because this world was no longer theirs. Too dense, too slow, too asleep. They're not gone, just phased out. And when the veil thins in dreams, in ritual, in grief, in music that moves you without warning, they reach back. A hand, a melody, a strange warmth in an empty room. You crouch at the base of a mound. The mist parts for a moment. Not much. Just enough to see the door. A small arch of stone you've never noticed before. But it's there. Covered in moss. Almost glowing. You don't go in. No one does, not physically anyway, but you touch it. And your fingers tingle like they remember a shape they once held. Some say the Tuatha aren't separate from us, that their essence flows in our blood, in dreams. In every moment we reach for something higher without knowing why. You don't have to believe it. But sometimes, when you hear wind harp through tree branches, and it sounds almost like a name you've forgotten, it's hard not to wonder, what if they're still here? What if they're waiting, not to reclaim thrones or castles, but to remind us, to remember how to see the earth, not as property, but as parent, how to feel the stars, not as distant, but as family, how to exist without conquering. Before the moon's rhythm locked us into cycles of forgetting, you stand. The mist closes in behind you. The mound disappears, but the tingling in your hand stays. And maybe you hum a tune you don't remember learning. The road curves away from green hills and ancient mounds. You descend not in elevation, but in frequency. The trees thin. The stars overhead seem to pause like they're waiting to see whether you'll go further. And then just past the tree line rises a shape. Sharp, massive, silent, a mountain, Mount Shasta. It doesn't look like much at first glance, just a snowy cone in Northern California. But this mountain isn't famous for hiking trails or ski runs. It's famous for something far stranger. Whispers, stories, a hum that people feel in their teeth. A name that keeps showing up where it shouldn't. Lemuria. You remember them from earlier telepathic giants, androgynous beings, bearers of crystal knowledge. They vanished beneath the sea, or so the myths say. But some didn't drown. Some didn't leave. Some went inward into the earth, into Shasta. It started with a book. In 1899, a man named Frederick Spencer Oliver wrote A Dweller on Two Planets. He claimed it was dictated to him telepathically by a Lemurian named Philos the Thebetan. The message Lemurians still existed. They had retreated beneath Mount Shasta, where they lived in a vast crystalline city called Telos. The world scoffed, but the mountain didn't, because people kept arriving, and they started reporting strange things. Glowing orbs drifting through trees. Footsteps in snow without a source. Soft voices speaking in languages that aren't in any textbook. Some people came for spiritual awakening. Others came to disappear. You walk closer. The snow isn't crunching the way it should. It's too soft, too quiet. Like the ground's absorbing sound, wrapping you in a blanket of stillness. The trees are tall, and still their branches oddly symmetrical, like they were grown not by accident, but by design. They say the Lemurians inside Telos are immortal, that they walk among us when needed. You can recognize them supposedly by their height, their glowing skin, and their eyes too clear, too calm, too deep. They wear white robes. They never leave footprints. They never speak above a whisper. Some say they guard the Earth's energy grid, a vast crystalline network of ley lines stretching across the globe. Shasta, they claim, is one of the main nodes, a planetary heart chakra. And the Lemurians, they keep the pulse beating. You might think it's all New Age nonsense, and that's fine. But even the skeptics feel something here. People report vivid dreams, sudden downloads of knowledge, visions during meditation. They leave offerings at the foot of the mountain. Quartz, feathers, handwritten prayers folded with trembling fingers, because something responds. And what does this have to do with before the moon? Everything. According to Lemurian lore, the world once existed at a higher frequency. Denser light, looser boundaries between thought and matter. You didn't have to move your hands to create, you just focused. You didn't speak, you harmonized. Then came the fall, a cosmic shift, a distortion of planetary vibration, and with it came the moon, not as an innocent satellite, but as a regulator, a tide setter, a rhythm enforcer. The Lemurians felt it before anyone else. They saw the coming density, the anchoring of thought into flesh, the rise of linear time. So they left the surface, not to escape, but to preserve, to carry the memory, the frequency, the code. You stop walking. You're at a small clearing. There's nothing here. No buildings, no doors, just stillness. But the hair on your arms stands up because something is watching, not with judgment, not even with curiosity, just with remembrance. You sit. The snow doesn't melt beneath you. It accepts your weight like it expected you. And for a moment, you understand. The Lemurians don't want to rule. They don't want to return with fanfare and fireworks. They want resonance, memory, awakening. Not loud, but collective. Quiet and steady, like roots growing beneath the surface of the world. And maybe they are you. Maybe they're not a separate race, but a dormant part of humanity. A forgotten version of us, buried under centuries of fear, pollution, and forgetting. Waiting for enough of us to slow down, to remember, to vibrate in the right key. Some believe their city isn't physical at all. It exists on a different plane superimposed, invisible to most, but just one blink away. That certain rituals, frequencies, or places can phase you into alignment. The same way, two radio stations can overlap for a second before pulling apart again. You hear it now, a tone, not a sound exactly, but a pressure in the center of your chest. A memory you never made. A sadness so beautiful you want to cry, but don't know why. It's not grief. It's homesickness for something you've never seen, but have always carried. The wind moves through the clearing. It smells like quartz and pine. And something else. Like lightning held in still water. You exhale, and in that moment, the mountain breathes with you. Not a storm, not a quake. Just one long, slow inhale. A greeting, a welcome back. You open your eyes, and the clearing is just a clearing. No shining cities, no glowing giants. But you know, and the mountain knows you know, so you stand. Brush off the snow, and walk back the way you came. But the path feels different. The trees lean toward you now. The wind carries something like a melody. And in your pocket you find a small crystal. You don't remember putting it there, but it's warm and humming. The trail fades behind you, swallowed by trees that no longer rustle. You've walked out of pine and crystal and stepped into something older, quieter, and far more patient. The air is thick again, but not with mist, with time. Your feet touch soil that once hosted one of the longest-lived cultures in human history. A culture that didn't conquer or collapse. It simply endured like a spiral that never stopped turning. Welcome to Japan. Not the neon skyline, not the shogun scrolls, but something far deeper. Something almost forgotten. The Jomon. You crouch beside a shallow river. The stones are smooth and round, shaped by 14,000 years of memory. That's not a metaphor. That's the time span of the Jomon culture, one of the oldest continuous human societies we know of, stretching from around 14,000 BCE to 300 BCE, long before the pyramids, long before Stonehenge, long before writing. While most humans were chasing mammoths or sharpening spears, the Jomon were making pottery, not crude bowls. Art, delicate spiraled corded patterns that echo like fingerprints through millennia. Their name even comes from those ropes. Jomon means cord marked. And the shapes they carved weren't random. They were fractal, recurring, designed. Patterns you find in nature, patterns you find in stars. But pottery wasn't all they left behind. They left eyes. Scattered across Japan, archaeologists have uncovered thousands of figurines, humanoid but not. Wide hips, thick limbs, helmets that look like armor, eyes that are round, bulging almost insect-like, or goggle-like, alien-like. These are the dogs. No one knows exactly what they were for. Fertility idols, some say. Toys. Ritual effigies. But they don't feel like toys. They feel like watchers. Statues meant to witness. To remember. To warn, you pick one up in your mind. It's light and heavy at the same time. As if the weight isn't in the clay, but in the silence it holds. The eyes aren't just big. They're ready, focused on something beyond your shoulders. Not what's behind you, what's beneath you. Some theorists believe the Jomon were in contact with sky people, beings who came from the stars, not with conquest, but with conversation. who didn't bring weapons, but frequencies, harmonies, a new way of remembering. The Jomon weren't farmers or warriors. They lived in semi-permanent villages, fished, foraged, honored cycles. They didn't grow empires. They grew rhythm. Historians still debate whether their longevity was due to isolation or adaptation. But some suspect another factor: awareness. The Jomon myths speak of visitors, not gods, not monsters, messengers, creatures from the sky who came to guide, to teach balance with the land. Not through commandments, but through resonance. And then came the change. Somewhere along the spiral, something shifted. The harmony frayed. Maybe it was a cultural drift. Maybe it was the arrival of new people. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the moon. The moon that had always been there, yes, but not always. Active. What if the moon wasn't just a rock, but a mechanism, a filter, a regulator of consciousness? When it switched on, something changed in Earth's vibration, in your cells, in the way memory worked. Stories became metaphor, rituals became superstition, knowledge became myth. And the Jomon, they didn't forget, they let go. Some say they chose to disappear, not in defeat, but in timing. Like birds knowing when to migrate. Like instruments fading from a song once their part is played. You sit now in a quiet grove, and suddenly you realize you're surrounded. Small mounds, rocks stacked just so, patterns etched faintly into bark and stone. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud, but very, very deliberate. A map maybe, a warning, or an invitation. The wind shifts. A leaf falls at your feet. You pick it up. There's a line down its center, curved just slightly. A spiral. You've seen that spiral before, in Mayan glyphs, in Celtic stone, in Sumerian carvings, in galaxies, and in Dogu eyes. What if the Jomon weren't isolated? What if they were part of something global, not in trade, but in frequency? A network of cultures, all tuning into the same song, the same pulse beneath the earth, the same before the moon solidified consciousness into waking sleep, before the stars became distant and gods became history, before stories had to be written down in order to survive, because the dog weren't just statues, they were anchors to another way of being, a memory preserved not in words, but in shape, in curve, in stare. And maybe they're still active. Some say that under certain conditions, on certain nights, during specific alignments, you can feel them. Hear a hum in the ground. See a shimmer at the corner of your eye. Not a ghost, not a hallucination, a reminder. You're not alone. Not now. Not ever. Because before cities, before empires, before pyramids and power, there were the Jomon. And before the Jomon, there were stars. The stars have been following you, haven't they? Not just up above, but reflected in puddles, gleaming in stone carvings, hiding in spirals on cave walls. It's not that they're watching. It's that they remember you. Or perhaps they're remembering through you. You're somewhere in West Africa now, on the dry red cliffs of the Bandiagara escarpment in Mali. The air is thin, the rocks are ancient, but the story here, it's older than both. You don't need to dig, you just need to listen. This is the land of the Dogon, a quiet, brilliant people who trace their history back through millennia. Farmers, craftsmen, astronomers, and storytellers. The Dogon don't need telescopes. They have drums, and stories, and something deeper than observation memory. Here's what makes the Dogon so unsettling. For scientists, that is. They have known for centuries, without modern instruments, that the star Sirius isn't one star, but two. They say that Sirius, the brightest star in our sky, has a companion. A tiny, dense, invisible star they call Potolo. They say it's the heaviest thing in the universe, that it takes 50 years to orbit the main star, that it's made of matter so heavy a handful would weigh as much as the Earth. And guess what? They're right. Astronomers confirmed the existence of Sirius B, a white dwarf star, in 1970, decades after anthropologists first recorded the Dogon's knowledge of it. Sirius B is tiny, incredibly dense, and invisible to the naked eye. And it orbits Sirius A every 50 years. How did they know? How? The Dogon say they were told by beings called the Nommo, half fish, half human. The Nommo came from the stars, specifically Sirius. They arrived in a spinning vessel that landed in a burst of water like a fish diving into a pond. They were twins, triplets, multiples, genderless, or both gendered. They spoke in vibration. They taught agriculture, language, metallurgy, even astronomy. They weren't gods. They were teachers. Now skeptics have scrambled to explain this. Maybe a European explorer told the Dogon about Sirius B and they incorporated it into their myths. Maybe it was coincidence. A lucky guess? But these arguments feel flimsy, rushed, because the Dogon knew details, very specific details, about a celestial object you can't see, track, or measure without advanced technology. And here's the kicker. The Nommo didn't just teach the Dogon about the stars. They taught them about cycles, about time, about how reality isn't fixed. It spins, returns, renews. And how long ago the Earth was different. Not just geologically, energetically. The Nommo arrived in a world unshaped, raw, a place that needed tuning. They weren't colonists. They were resonators. Think of Earth as a great drum-off pitch echoing chaos. The Nommo adjusted it, set it to a frequency that allowed life to emerge, not just DNA, consciousness, and they left behind something more, not just knowledge but rhythm. The Dogon still keep that rhythm. In dances, masks, ceremonies, and drum patterns that don't just honor the stars, they synchronize with them. The shapes in their rituals mimic orbital paths. Their calendars follow stellar alignments. Their masks, tall, geometric, with lines that resemble signal diagrams, don't just tell stories. They transmit memory. You begin to suspect the Dogon weren't just lucky sky watchers. They were, and still are, receivers. You walk farther. The wind tastes like dust and data. You find a cave. Not deep. Just enough shade for someone to sit eyes closed, listening to the pulse of Sirius overhead. You sit. It's quiet. And then you remember, they say before the moon. Yes, that theme again. The Earth's rotation was different. Its axis wasn't as stable. Tides weren't rhythmic. Consciousness wasn't locked into loops. The arrival of the moon changed that. Not by accident, not even by gravity alone. As a signal scrambler, a regulator, the Nommo came before that, before the lockdown. Their message was pure. They tuned us to a song that came directly from the stars, from Sirius, from home. But when the moon appeared, some say placed deliberately, that signal was fractured, distorted, covered in static. And the only way to hold on to it was ceremony, repetition, masks, drums, memory disguised as culture. That's what the Dogon have done for centuries. They've remembered by doing. They didn't write the data. They danced it, sang it, breathed it into generations, and in doing so, they held the key, not to Sirius, to us, because the Nommo didn't just seed knowledge. They seeded something in us, a question, a hunger, a feeling we all carry, but rarely understand that we've forgotten something essential, something that hums just under consciousness, that the sky is more than backdrop, that you've been somewhere else. You stand in the cave. It's darker now, but you're not alone, not in a scary way, in a deeply familiar way. You hear a drum in the distance, a slow, even beat, like a heart, like an orbit, like a countdown. Maybe it's part of the ceremony, or maybe it's just the stars tapping gently on the edge of your memory saying, you're almost ready. You're moving now, not walking exactly, but gliding. Like your feet forgot gravity. Like something inside you decided it's time to remember the path that doesn't follow roads or rivers, but DNA. Because now we're diving into the oldest stories of all, not myths carved in stone, not songs echoed through ritual, but something buried far deeper in your body, in your code. We're going back to Sumer, back to the gods who weren't gods, to the beings who came from above, walked like kings, and engineered the most dangerous creature on the planet U. They were called the Anunnaki. If you haven't heard the name, you haven't been listening. These so-called gods of Mesopotamia, worshipped in temples older than time zones, weren't celestial in the way you might think. They didn't hurl lightning bolts or demand burnt offerings. They built. They spliced. They coded. The Sumerians, among the first civilizations with writing, wrote about the Anunnaki, not as metaphors, but as administrators, scientists, overseers of Earth, and among them was Enki, Lord of Water Mischief and Genetic Engineering. Enki created Adapa, a proto-human, a model of perfection, wise, strong, enlightened, but mortal. Here's the story. Adapa, Enki's perfect human prototype, was fishing one day when a sudden wind capsized his boat. Furious, Adapa broke the wing of the south wind. Yes, the wind had wings in these tales and disrupted the cosmic order, so he was summoned, not to court, to heaven. Anu, king of the Anunnaki, called Adapa to account. A human in the halls of the sky gods. He was offered food and drink, a gift, immortality, and he said no, not out of pride, out of loyalty. Enki, his creator, warned him not to eat anything offered in heaven. It was poison, he claimed. A trick, but it wasn't. It was the real deal. The bread of eternal life. The water of divinity. Adapa obeyed. He refused. And he was sent back to Earth. Brilliant, blameless, but mortal. And so we die. Because of obedience. Because of misinformation. Because of a design flaw. Or maybe a feature. Historians still debate whether Adapa was a metaphor for early humanity, a spiritual parable, or a twisted reflection of biblical Adam. But here's the thing, his story is older than Genesis. And weirdly, it rhymes. You begin to wonder, what if Adapa wasn't just a myth? What if he was the first of many prototypes? What if the Anunnaki didn't create us once, but repeatedly, refining the recipe each time? What if humanity is an open source project? You stop walking, because now the story turns darker. The Anunnaki may have made us, but not for poetry. According to some versions, they created us as workers, to mine gold, to serve, to obey. They needed hands, so they built hands, but hands can become fists, and fists remember how to rise. Some versions of the story say the Anunnaki regretted what they made. Others say they lost control, that we multiplied too fast, grew too clever, asked too many questions. And so, they reset us. Floods, famine, fire, a hard reboot. Sound familiar? Maybe that's what the story of the Great Flood is, a memory of system failure, of creators pulling the plug. But not all of them agreed. Some, like Enki, loved their creation. They left behind clues, languages, symbols, DNA triggers. They scattered memory like breadcrumbs. And Adapa, he became the first echo, the first glitch in the matrix, the one who almost made it, the one who remembered. He passed that memory on, through dream, through myth, through you. You're not just walking through history anymore. You're inside a code base written in clay tablets and bloodlines, a story that still runs in the background of your every thought. And here's the chilling twist. Some researchers believe the moon might have something to do with it, that it wasn't just part of Earth's natural formation, but an installation, a stabilizer, a surveillance system, a lock, maybe even a vault. Because if the Anunnaki, or whoever came before, knew we were dangerous, why let us evolve unchecked? Why not build in failsafes? What better failsafe than the moon? A perfect clock, a memory eraser, a reminder to stay small. So what if Adapa's story isn't over? What if we are the descendants of a perfect being who got just close enough to touch immortality and turned it down? What if that moment has looped ever since? Every time we build a civilization, reach for the stars, experiment with DNA, we get just close enough. Then the moon resets the game. A flood, a war, a forgetting. But every time we remember a little bit more, you step into a clearing. The moon isn't out yet. You tilt your head skyward and imagine it just out of view, waiting like a moderator to cut the mic. But tonight, the mic is still on, and the memory still lingers. Adapa didn't die a fool. He left behind a legacy, not in temples, but in you, the part of you that wonders, that rebels, that refuses the poisoned gift and waits for the real one. Maybe it's coming back around, and maybe this time you'll say yes. It starts with a knock, not on a door, but on the membrane of the 1950s American psyche. A time of pressed suits, atomic anxiety, and Eisenhower calm. But under the surface, something was humming. Something Venusian. Imagine this. It's March 16th, 1957. You're in Washington, D.C., the Pentagon of all places, and into that five-sided fortress walks a man who doesn't belong anywhere on Earth. Not because of his clothes, sharp-tailored mid-century suave. Not because of his voice, calm, clear, without accent. But because of his blood. It isn't red. His name, Valiant Thor. A name so comic book perfect, you'd expect him to burst through a wall wielding a laser harp. But he doesn't. He shows up quietly. No spaceship. No beam of light. Just a suitcase, a smile, and a warning. Stop playing with nuclear fire. Now maybe you've heard the name, maybe you haven't. But Valiant Thor is legend in the UFO contactee community. He claimed to be from Venus. Not the Venus we know, lava-soaked atmosphere of sulfur, but a different Venus. One out of phase. One that exists on a higher frequency, unreachable by probe but still nearby. Like a radio station just outside your dial. He said he'd come to help, to warn humanity about its trajectory, to offer alternatives, peace, free energy, global cooperation, less bombing, more beaming. And allegedly he stayed for 3 years in the Pentagon, advising officials, attending meetings, offering suggestions, until finally realizing we weren't quite ready, he left. Now, plenty of people dismiss this as bunk, a Cold War myth with hair gel and a silver jumpsuit. But here's what's strange. Valiant Thor wasn't just a random hoax. His story was corroborated sort of by multiple witnesses, high-ranking ones. Photos exist. Names were named. And even if it's a hoax, it's one that refuses to die. That's something. But let's put the story itself aside for a moment and ask the bigger question. Why Venus? Why would a supposedly advanced civilization come from a planet that, according to every telescope we own, is basically a hell sauna wrapped in toxic rain, unless Venus isn't what we think, unless there's another layer. Some theorists believe Venus once supported life, that it was Earth-like long ago, but suffered a catastrophic transformation. Maybe natural, maybe not. And maybe the beings who lived there left. Not by rocket ship, but by dimension, a shift, a migration through frequency. And Valiant Thor, he's the callback, the field agent, the guy sent to see if we've matured enough to rejoin the conversation. Spoiler, we haven't. But here's where it gets even weirder. Valiant Thor isn't just one person in one story. He's archetypal. Variations of him show up again and again in contact narratives. Tall human-like beings, blondes, calm, radiant. They speak all languages. They glow a little. They talk about unity vibration, the importance of planetary harmony. No fear, no fire, just resonance. These are often referred to as the Venusians, or sometimes the Ashtar Command, or if you want the fringe deep cut, the Valthorites, beings who claim to be guardians, helpers, and sometimes babysitters. They're not here to rule. They're here to watch. And here's what they've been watching. Our patterns. Build, boom, rebuild, forget. They've seen it before. Not just with us, but with others. And each time a civilization begins waking up, discovering zero-point energy, unlocking deep genetic memory, decoding star patterns, the same thing happens. A nudge, a contact, a reminder, and then silence. Because the moon kicks in, the cycle resets, the awakening collapses. But now the cycle is short. The moon isn't erasing as effectively. The dreams are coming faster. The glitch is more frequent. You turn your face to the sky. The stars are sharp tonight. Cold, but comforting. Somewhere, you think someone's watching back. Not through a telescope. Through you. Because the Venusians, if they exist, don't observe from ships. They observe through consciousness, through dream, through music, through the child who draws a star map she's never been taught, through the man who suddenly understands mathematics he never studied, through you, when you can't shake the feeling that you've heard this before, that you were warned, that you've met Valiant Thor. Not in this life, maybe, but in the drift between them. Some say the moon isn't just a clock or cage. It's a veil. And beings like Thor, they slip beneath it. Not to change the world, but to remind it. Briefly, gently. And then they vanish, not because they've given up, but because they've planted the seed. And seeds don't bloom under pressure. They bloom in silence, like this moment. You stand in the dark on Earth, the real Earth, but the air feels thinner, lighter, like the veil just loosened for a breath. You feel it, don't you? A presence, not threatening, not alien, familiar, like an older sibling you forgot you had. And he says, "We're still here. We never left. We're waiting for you to remember." The wind shifts again, and this time it carries music. Not a song you've heard before, but one that feels oddly ancestral, like something from childhood, except older, deeper. The kind of song you remember from before remembering. You're not in modern America anymore, or ancient Mesopotamia, or even myth-soaked Japan. You're somewhere beyond time, standing in a forest that might have once been a world, or a dream, or a veil, and stepping through that veil are the elves. No, not the Jingle Bell kind. Not the candy cane factory dwellers with squeaky voices and striped tights. You can forget all that. We're not talking folklore as it was twisted. We're talking about what came before the dilution, before the moon glazed memory over with fairy dust and bedtime stories. We're talking about the firstborn, the tall ones, the luminous ones, the beings of long memory and long silence, the ones Tolkien tried to describe and still didn't quite capture, because the elves, the real ones, don't fit neatly in fantasy books. They don't just build tree houses and shoot arrows. They shape reality. You take a step into the grove, and the air gets thinner, like the atmosphere itself is trying not to disturb the presence here. The trees seem taller than physics should allow. Their trunks curve inward at the top, forming arches without touching. And in the clearing, faint footprints, barefoot, human-like, but too slender, too perfect. Elves. In almost every ancient European tradition, they show up. The Tuatha de Danann in Ireland, the Liosalfar, light elves of Norse myth, the fair folk of Scotland and Wales, the Side, the shining ones. Always luminous, always aloof, and always just out of reach. Historians still debate whether these stories were metaphors for old gods, noble ancestors, or simply warnings about the forest after dark. But the pattern's too consistent. Across cultures, these beings are tied to immortality or extreme longevity, music especially of the haunting and harmonic kind, deep connection to nature, plants, animals, stones, a reluctance to be seen by humans after a certain time, a fading and eventual vanishing from this world. So what happened? The story goes that these beings once lived openly walking beside us, teaching us singing to the trees and the stones and even to our bones. But then something changed. A shift. A thickening of the air, metaphorically speaking. Reality became dense, harder. Time got heavier. Death got louder. And so they faded, not because they were defeated, because they were tuned out. The moon again. Before the moon, Earth may have been different, less gravitationally locked, less lunar controlled. Frequency-wise, it may have been more hospitable to higher beings. The elves weren't extraterrestrials. They were ultra-terrestrials. Not from somewhere else, just from a when else, or a what else. When the lunar frequency locked in, they couldn't resonate anymore. So they withdrew. Some into forests, some into mountains, some into stories. But not all, because here's the strange thing. People still report encounters. Not often, not loudly, but enough to notice. A tall, silent figure walking the ridgeline during twilight. Eyes that reflect not light, but stars. Music in the woods that doesn't follow human scale. Wounds that heal faster than they should. Time lost or added during hikes. And dreams. Oh, the dreams. People dreaming of silver cities tucked into cliffs, of white stone halls echoing with harp and wind, of languages they understand but can't repeat upon waking. Always with that same presence, kind, calm, ancient, sad, because the elves remember. They remember before the moon, before we forgot, before everything became heavy and sharp and loud. And some believe they're trying to reach us again, not with ships or scrolls, with vibration, through music, through certain chords, through poetry that makes your ribs hurt, through art that doesn't make sense unless you feel it. You walk deeper into the clearing. There's a tree that's too symmetrical. Its bark glows faintly, not like bioluminescence, like memory. And you know without knowing this is a doorway, not to another place, but to a different version of here. They used to open easily, these doorways. You just had to want it, to believe, to be quiet. But now, the world is too loud, too bright, too fast. And so the elves, if they're still here, wait. Not behind the veil, but just beside it, waiting for us to slow down, to remember the harmonics, to match the key. You touch the tree. It's warm, and in that moment, a sound, not a note, a chord, not music exactly, something deeper, older, a sound that your bones recognize. It lasts just a second, but it's enough. You see them, not clearly, just shapes in the mist, tall, cloaked in light, watching but not judging, singing but without mouths. The language isn't in your ears, it's in your memory, and you know what they're saying. We're still here. You haven't lost us. You only need to remember the door. The vision fades. The tree stops glowing, but the warmth doesn't. You step back into the normal world, but it feels less normal now. The trees less ordinary. The moon, once again missing from the sky, now feels like a curtain, and behind it, elves, not fairy tale ones, the firstborn, the memory keepers. And they're not waiting to return. They're waiting for you to return. The forest behind you fades like an old dream, and now the terrain shifts boulders, rising like forgotten shoulders of titans beneath moss and time. The wind here doesn't whisper. It groans, like it's hauling memories too big to carry alone. You're somewhere high now, maybe in the Caucasus, maybe the Andes, maybe the Himalayas. It doesn't matter. Because in every part of the world, the earth tells the same quiet truth. Giants once walked here, not metaphorical ones. Not basketball players, giants. Actual towering beings, bigger than elephants. Some stories say 10 feet tall. Some say 40. Some say taller, still so big their steps carved valleys. Their bones became mountains, and their teeth, well, those still show up in the strangest fossil digs. You crouch beside a slab of rock. It's not carved, not sculpted, but something about it feels shaped. Like a shoulder blade the size of a canoe, or a knuckle worn down by centuries of snow and sun. There's no plaque, no tourist sign, just the eerie certainty that someone once stood here who could see entire forests like flower beds. Almost every culture has these stories. In the Bible, there's Og, the last of the Rephaim, a giant king who allegedly ruled Bashan and slept in a bed more than 13 feet long. The Book of Enoch goes even further, describing a pre-flood race of Nephilim offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men. They were massive, insatiable, and eventually wiped out by flood by fire by divine regret. The Norse spoke of Jotnar chaotic giants who battled the gods in endless cycles of creation and collapse. In Greek myth, the Titans came before the Olympians, enormous and elemental. Even Native American traditions speak of the Siteka red-haired cannibal giants, defeated by tribes after long wars. Their bones allegedly were found in Nevada's Lovelock Cave. But here's the strangest part. Some of those bones were found. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, newspapers across the United States regularly published reports of giant skeletons unearthed during farming or construction. Femurs 3 feet long, skulls with double rows of teeth, burial mounds containing beings twice the height of an average man. And then they vanished. Smithsonian involvement, closed investigations, quiet retractions, no follow-ups. Historians still debate whether these reports were hoaxes, misidentified fossils, or something more. But the pattern is suspicious. The stories are consistent. And the idea, it just won't die. You climb higher. The wind picks up. But you're sweating now, not from exertion, but from something else. A feeling. Like walking through someone else's dream. A big someone. The idea that Earth was once ruled, or at least shared by giants, isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. Paleontology proves that life used to be bigger. Megafauna. Enormous birds. Crocodiles the length of buses. Dragonflies the size of hawks. Gravity and oxygen levels were different. So why not humanoids? What if giants weren't freaks of nature, but the norm? What if we're the scaled-down version? Some myths claim the giants weren't just huge. They were builders, engineers, the ones who raised the megaliths, who shaped the world before the moon reset the scale. Think about it. Many ancient stone structures seem too massive for human construction. The blocks at Baalbek in Lebanon, for instance, weigh over 1,000 tons each. Even with modern cranes, we'd struggle to move them, but to a 20-foot builder, that's just heavy lifting. What if these giants were the original architects, not just of cities, but of memory? You sit on a boulder and look out over the valley. It's late now. The stars are creeping in, and still no moon. The giants, some say, were lost in the flood. Not just physically, historically. Their bones crushed, their names erased, their size inconvenient. But others believe they're still here, not walking around snapping trees like twigs. Not anymore, but as stone, as landscape. Some indigenous legends claim certain mountains were once beings giants who lay down and became the earth itself. Rivers flowed from their eyes. Forests grew from their hair. Volcanoes were their breath. And now, we build ski resorts on their backs. You reach down and touch the rock beneath you. It's cool, solid. But there's a strange heat beneath it, a thrum, like a heartbeat slowed to geological time. Maybe they're sleeping, or maybe they're not beings anymore, but blueprints the genetic memory of Earth herself. The idea of magnitude, of scale, of something grand that doesn't fit in our tidy little science books. Because here's the truth. The world used to be bigger, not just physically, spiritually, emotionally, and we've been shrinking ever since. Compressing, simplifying, forgetting. The giants weren't just tall, they were reminders that we once lived in a story too big for pages. That we once looked up to beings who didn't just build with stone, but with intention. And maybe that's why their bones had to disappear. Because remembering them makes everything else too small. You lie back on the boulder. The stars are louder now, singing in a language with no consonants. And for just a moment, you feel taller than you've ever felt. Like your fingers could pluck stars from the sky. Like your breath could cause landslides. Like your name is written into the ridges of every mountain. Then it fades, and the moon starts to rise. But you're not afraid, because now you know you were never meant to be small. You've descended from the mountains now, though it's hard to say exactly how. The terrain has shifted again this time into something darker, denser. Not evil, but heavy. Like a memory you've avoided for too long, finally asking to be remembered. The mist here isn't like before. It's not dreamlike or mystical. It clings, like regret. Like ink spilled across old parchment. You're standing at the edge of a river that doesn't have a name you can speak out loud. And across that river, an empire lost not to flood or fire, but to vengeance. This is the domain of the Nibelungs, not as well known as Atlantis or the Anunnaki. Not shimmering with the romantic haze of elves or Lemurians. No, the Nibelungs are sharp-edged. Their story hums with betrayal, blood oaths, gold, and madness. A myth that feels too real to be a story, and too consistent across time to be coincidence. You might know them from Wagner's Ring Cycle, or from the Nibelungenlied, the medieval German epic, or even from Norse sagas, where they show up as cursed kings and doomed warriors. But here's what they were before the opera and the translations. Guardians of memory, the Nibelungs were said to possess a vast treasure hoard, Nibelung gold, stolen, cursed, fought over, and ultimately lost. But that gold wasn't just coins or shiny stuff. It was knowledge, compressed memory, a record of the world before forgetting. And like all sacred knowledge, it was too powerful to hold without consequence. You cross the river. The air feels thicker. The trees don't sway, they stand, watching. Their bark is scarred, like it's been burned and frozen over and over again. And somewhere in the distance, you hear steel on steel. Not from battle, but from forging. Because the Nibelungs were smiths, crafters of things too perfect. Weapons that could never miss, rings that could never be broken, helmets that changed the wearer's form. Stories say they were dwarves, not in the Snow White sense, but in the old world Norse myth way, subterranean, ancient, endlessly skilled. Beings who lived underground, not because they hid, but because they remembered. The earth, after all, doesn't forget. The most famous Nibelung tale is that of Siegfried, the hero who wins the gold, the girl, the glory, and loses everything else. Betrayal, murder, revenge, the usual. But under all the melodrama is something more tragic. Every character is doomed not because of their choices, but because of the curse. The gold, the memory, it warps them, destroys them, because they're not ready to carry it. Historians still debate whether the Nibelung saga is based on real royal families. Some trace the roots back to actual events in the collapsing Roman Empire. Others see it as pure myth. But here's the haunting question. What if it's both? What if the Nibelung legacy is a story of what happens when truth survives? Not truth as in facts. Truth as in memory. As in vibration. As in a pattern that refuses to fade even when buried under generations of forgetting. The gold wasn't just wealth. It was a frequency, a code, a piece of the before. And humans, at least the kind of humans we've become, since the moon can't hold that kind of code without shattering. You keep walking. You pass a broken stone column half submerged in moss and regret. There's an inscription, but it's not in any language you know. And yet, you understand it. Roughly, it means those who hold what was become what must not be. It sends a chill through you. Because what if the Nibelungs weren't cursed because they held the gold? What if the curse was the memory itself? Imagine holding the blueprint of a time before the moon. A time of giants, elves, star beings, and harmony. Imagine knowing it, feeling it, seeing how far we've fallen, how much has been lost. It would break you, not because it's false, but because it's too true. And so, the Nibelungs did what humans always do when they can't destroy something. They buried it under stories, under steel, under operas and footnotes, under the ground where even the bravest archaeologist won't dig too deep. But the stories leak because memory is a virus. It finds a way. That's why the Nibelung saga keeps resurfacing in poems, in dreams, in art that feels too heavy for its canvas. You've seen it, felt it. That moment when a piece of music cuts too deep, when a line of dialogue makes your chest hurt, when a ring, just a simple ring, feels like a planet on your hand. It's not fiction, it's recognition. You reach the center of the ruins. There's a forge here, cold now, silent. But the anvil still sits, and beside it, a hammer. You don't touch it, not because it's dangerous, because it's familiar. You've been here before, maybe not in this life, but in a cycle, a story, a role you keep playing again and again with different names and the same ache. The Nibelungs weren't monsters. They were custodians, librarians of a truth too heavy to carry, but too sacred to burn. And maybe that's what makes them terrifying. They didn't forget. Even when it destroyed them, they remembered. You stand in silence. The moon is rising now, slow and pale. You see it through a gap in the stone ceiling. And for a second, just a second, you see something behind it. A shape, a reflection, or maybe just the truth. The moon wasn't made to help you remember. It was made to make sure you forget. But some memories outlive gravity, like gold buried in the bones of a broken hero, like a ring that always finds its way back, like you, still walking, still remembering. Even if it hurts, the ruins behind you vanish without a sound, like they were never there at all. Just a bruised echo in the landscape waiting for the right pair of eyes to glance backward. But you're walking forward now toward light. Or maybe it's just a lighter kind of shadow. You've arrived in South America, not the postcard version. No llamas, no cheerful markets, no jungle hikes with Wi-Fi. This is the old Andes, the hidden part, where the stone doesn't erode like it should, and the shapes don't behave like anything nature or normal humans ever built. Welcome to Puma Punku. You might have heard of it. Maybe in a travel documentary or in a rabbit hole titled Ancient Aliens Built This. But you don't need aliens to make this place mysterious. It's weird enough all on its own. Here's what you see. Massive stone blocks, some weighing up to 100 tons, scattered across a high plateau in Bolivia, more than 12,000 feet above sea level. The altitude alone is enough to leave you breathless. The precision is what steals the rest of your oxygen. These stones weren't just stacked, they were engineered. Carved with angles so sharp, so clean, they look like machine work. Some fit together with such perfect interlocking that not even a razor blade can slip between them. And the most baffling part, they're made of diorite and andesite rocks that even today would require diamond tools to cut so cleanly. And yet, the people who supposedly built this had no wheels, no writing, no metallurgy. No moon-calibrated timeline to trace it all neatly. Historians still debate whether Puma Punku was part of the Tiwanaku civilization or something older. Much older. Possibly pre-flood. Possibly pre-everything. The carbon dating doesn't help much. The site's been looted, rearranged, and repurposed so many times that trying to determine its origin is like carbon dating a Jenga tower. But here's the theory you're walking into. Puma Punku wasn't built. It was reconstructed. The original builders, gone. Vanished. Not because they failed, because they left. You crouch beside one of the famous H blocks, shaped like a perfect stylized capital H. There are dozens, all uniform, all carved with inhuman precision. They're not ornamental. They're functional, like components, like parts of a machine that's no longer running. A puzzle without the rest of the board. And here's the strangest possibility: these weren't just buildings. They were resonators, part of a larger energetic system designed to harness something we no longer feel. A frequency, a harmonic, a field. And when the frequency changed, when the moon arrived, perhaps they stopped working, so they were abandoned. Not in panic, but in ceremony. The way you shut down an instrument when the song is over. But the instruments are still here, still tuned, still waiting. Some say that the layout of Puma Punku aligns not just with solar events, but with lunar silence. The site seems designed for a sky without a moon, a celestial map calibrated to rhythms that predate the tides. Think about that. A temple to a sky we no longer see. What kind of civilization needs that? And why did they stop? You sit on one of the blocks. It's cold, but not unpleasant. Like metal cooled in a forge waiting for the next strike. And then you feel it, a vibration. Subtle, faint. Like the stone is still running a program even if the rest of the system is offline. Maybe it's never stopped. Maybe it's been broadcasting this whole time, trying to contact what the original builders, their descendants, us, or maybe it's broadcasting inward. Not into space, but into memory. Maybe the reason people come here and weep without knowing why is because something in these stones is whispering, you helped build this. Not your hands, your soul. In another turn of the cycle, before the forgetting, you walk now through the broken corridors. You recognize nothing and everything. There's no writing, no glyphs, no story etched into walls. And yet the whole place is a story, not one you read, one you feel, a story of cooperation, of intention, of a kind of beauty that didn't need to be explained because it was built into the geometry. And then the tone changed. The song ended, and they left. Some say to the stars, some say beneath, and some say they didn't leave at all. They just stepped sideways. And now, sometimes they step back, not to reclaim Puma Punku, but to check in, to see if we've remembered yet, to see if we've tuned ourselves again to that forgotten key. You stop at the far end of the site. The sun's dipping low now. Not quite sunset. Just that moment where everything turns gold for no reason. And you realize something. This place doesn't want to be solved. It wants to be heard. So you sit, you close your eyes, and you listen to the hum of stone, to the rhythm of a civilization that didn't shout but sang, to the silence of a moonless sky echoing in architecture. And you wonder, what if remembering isn't about facts? What if it's about frequency? And what if Puma Punku is still playing the note, waiting for us to sing back? You leave the high plateaus behind. The altitude still lingers in your breath, like it's not done with you yet. But now the air is thicker, warmer, coated with salt, and a faint metallic tang. Somewhere waves are crashing. You're descending into legend again, but this time the tide is involved. The sea before you is calm, too calm. And beneath it, according to stories too persistent to ignore, sleeps a city. This is the tale of Dwarka. You may not know the name, but you've heard this rhythm before. A city beneath the sea, remembered in myth, dismissed by science, whispered in dreams. But this one's real, or at least partially. Dwarka, in Indian legend, was the kingdom of Krishna, the blue-skinned god of compassion, trickery, and war. He built the city himself, or so the Mahabharata claims, rising it up from the sea, defending it with divine weapons, ruling it with wisdom, until one day it sank. Not from punishment, from purpose. Krishna's time was over, his work complete. So the city, like a breath, held too long, exhaled, and slipped back beneath the waves. Most dismissed it as myth until 2001. That year, marine archaeologists discovered stone structures off the coast of modern-day Dwarka, submerged formations that looked suspiciously artificial. Right angles, pillars, grids, roads, not natural reef, architecture. Some of the stones were carbon dated back to 9,000 years ago, thousands of years before any Indian civilization was supposed to exist. Historians still debate whether this site is the Dwarka or just an earlier, unrelated settlement. But for those who feel more than they measure, the answer is obvious. It was a city, and it chose to sink. You stand at the shoreline. The ocean stretches ahead like liquid memory. You can almost feel its structures below perfectly still waiting. Not ruined, just paused. Why would a civilization that advanced disappear? Because they knew Krishna, after all, wasn't just a warrior or king. He was a timekeeper, a destroyer of illusion. He understood cycles, and he knew when to leave. The legends say that once the Great War was over, once Dharma, the cosmic order, had been preserved, he sat quietly, watched his city one last time, and let it go. Not out of despair, out of design. Because Dwarka wasn't meant to last forever. It was meant to leave a trace, a memory. And maybe that's what you feel now, with your toes in the warm surf, and your gaze just barely catching the shimmer beneath the surface. This wasn't a city that sank. It was a city that withdrew, that turned itself into legend, because the world wasn't ready to hold its truth. Like so many others, what if all these sunken cities off the coasts of India, Japan, Cuba, Malta aren't separate tragedies, but phases, echoes of a pre-moon Earth? When humanity, or something like humanity, lived in tune with water instead of against it. You think of the flood myths. They're everywhere. Mesopotamia, Mesoamerica, Polynesia, China, Scandinavia, all telling the same story. Water rising, civilization drowning, a handful saved. But what if the flood wasn't punishment? What if it was a reset, not divine wrath, but a cosmic recalibration? And Dwarka was the alarm, a signal that the cycle had ended, that the age of resonance was fading, and the age of stone struggle and forgetting had begun. You walk into the surf, just ankle deep, but it feels deeper than that. You close your eyes, and for a moment the world shifts. You hear bells not ringing, but resonating, a low chime that echoes through salt and bone. The water pulls at you not to drown, but to reveal. You see pillars in your mind, crystal towers, soft blue light filtering through golden domes. People not human, not quite moving in perfect rhythm with the sea. This isn't imagination, it's recognition. Dwarka, like Atlantis, like Mu, like the Lemurian cities, was a node in the planetary network, a tuning fork, a place that held the Earth's frequency like a crystal bowl holds tone. When the moon locked into orbit, something changed. The tone warped, the resonance dulled. And so the cities, those that could let go, they didn't fight the flood, they invited it. Because they understood, when harmony is no longer possible, silence is sacred. And that's what Dwarka became, not a ruin, a silence, a pause, a hum, still buried in ocean salt, waiting for the rhythm to return. Some say divers still hear strange things down there. Bells that ring with no source. Shapes glimpsed through murky water that vanish when you focus. Dreams afterward of cities made of light and sea foam. The moon doesn't like these stories. It prefers land calendar's walls. But water remembers, and Dwarka is water's best secret. You turn back toward the shore. The sand is warm beneath your feet. The tide pulls softly at your ankles, and just for a moment, you hear it again. That bell. Low, clear, final. Not because it's over, because you're almost ready. The tide recedes behind you, leaving wet footprints that vanish faster than they should. The air grows still again, and now the world around you hums in a different key dryer, sharper, filled with silence that isn't emptiness, but concentration. You feel watched, but not by eyes, by memory. You've stepped into the desert, not sand dunes and mirages, but stone, sandstone, carved into walls, layered like forgotten pages. Dust motes swirl as if the air is remembering how to speak, and all around you faces. Not alive, but known. Welcome to Petra, the Rose City, carved into cliffs in what's now Jordan. You've seen pictures, majestic facades etched directly into rock glowing pink at sunrise, orange at dusk. But in person, something's different. The proportions feel off, not sloppy, intentional. Doorways too tall, steps too wide, passageways that don't lead anywhere unless you already know how to walk them. Petra wasn't just carved, it was tuned. Historians say it was the capital of the Nabatean people, an ancient Arab civilization known for trading incense, spices, and gold. But no one knows exactly when it began. The timelines slip and stutter. The Nabateans were suddenly advanced, as if they appeared fully formed with engineering, astronomy, and urban planning already in hand, as if someone taught them. You run your fingers along one of the carved columns. The stone is warm, not sun warm, stored warm, like it's been holding heat from another age. An age before the moon made us forget how to build without blueprints. Here's what we know: Petra's structures weren't just decorative. They were astronomical tools. The city's main buildings align with the solstices. Light filters through narrow canyons to strike specific carvings on specific days, illuminating symbols that no one even notices anymore. This wasn't just architecture. It was a clock, not a digital one, a cosmic one, a reminder that time isn't something you measure. It's something you tune into. You stand in front of the famous treasury, or Al-Khazni, that towering facade with the urn at the top. Tourists take pictures here every day, smiling unaware. But look again. The patterns are symmetrical, yes, but also rhythmic. The columns echo the spacing of harmonic intervals. The base is grounded in Earth's geometry. It's not just beautiful, it feels right, like a chord in stone. And some say the urn, it wasn't for treasure. It was a capstone, a frequency regulator, like the crown on a tuning fork. Historians still debate whether Petra was a religious center, a royal city, or a trading post. But maybe it was all three and more. Maybe it was a portal, not to another place, to another state. What if Petra was designed to remind you how to resonate with memory, to reactivate parts of your body and mind that the moon's gravity has numbed. You pass through the Isiki, a narrow canyon that serves as the city's entrance. It's not a simple path. It curves. It hums. The walls are high, smooth, unnaturally symmetrical in places. Sound echoes in strange ways here. If you hum a note, it doubles back at you in a different pitch, like the canyon is singing with you. Ancient guides claimed the psyche was alive, that it changed shape subtly over time, adjusting to the energy of those walking through. That if your heart was heavy, the passage narrowed. If your intention was pure, the wind would clear your path. You smile, not because you believe it, because you feel it. You emerge from the Siki and look back, and for a second, the entire city behind you looks different. Larger, older, like a skeleton of something cosmic. Not ruins, runes. Petra, you begin to suspect, is not the remains of something that collapsed. It's a chord still ringing, a vibration encoded in stone. Left behind by a people who remembered what the earth sounded like before the sky froze, before the moon slowed everything down, before time became a series of boxes to tick. You find a smaller chamber now, one not listed on any map. The doorway is narrow, carved with spiral motifs that seem to shift as you pass them. Inside, it's cool and dark, but not empty. There's a hum, faint, like a crystal bowl being struck once long ago and still echoing in silence. You sit, and it welcomes you, not loudly, gently. You feel your breath sinking with the rock, your heartbeat slowing, your thoughts drifting not away from reality, but back toward it. A deeper reality, one where Petra isn't a ruin. It's a key, not to open a door, to open you. You see flashes memories not your own, hands carving symbols with absolute certainty, voices chanting in octaves you didn't know existed, eyes too bright, too old, watching stars realign. And then the moon, not rising, arriving, and with it, the forgetting begins. But the stones resist. They hold the memory for you, for anyone who listens long enough. You open your eyes. You're alone. The chamber is quiet, but you know something changed. You don't need to understand it. You just need to carry it. You leave Petra without looking back. You don't need to. It's in you now. That rhythm, that song, that memory of a world that built cities not to dominate, but to harmonize. Petra didn't fall. It waited, and it knew you'd come. The stone whispers fade behind you, replaced by the crunch of gravel beneath your feet, and the sudden scent of dry fire like incense that's been waiting 1,000 years to be lit again. You're walking into a desert, but not just any desert. This one is wide, flat, vast, and covered in lines. Welcome to Nazca. You've seen the photos. Giant birds, spirals, monkeys, astronauts etched into the Peruvian desert, like a chalkboard left for the gods. Lines so massive they can't be seen clearly from the ground. You have to fly to understand the scope. You have to rise like the old ones did. That's what this place was made for, and that's your first clue. The Nazca lines cover nearly 200 square miles of desert and are estimated to be over 2,000 years old. Some are simple geometric shapes. Others are vast depictions of animals or humanoid forms, and still others are just runways. Long, perfectly straight paths that lead nowhere. Too big for foot traffic. Too narrow for agricultural use. Historians still debate their purpose. Ritual walkways, calendars, messages to the gods, but maybe just Maybe they weren't made for gods at all. Maybe they were made for visitors. You look at one of the lines stretching out into the horizon. It's perfectly straight. Not mostly. Perfectly. Engineers still marvel at it. No satellite. No aerial tools. Just pre-Columbian humans laying out geometric wonders that remain unmarred by wind or time. Why? Here's one theory. The Nazca weren't trying to please the sky. They were trying to talk to it, or maybe answer it. You see, this desert isn't just dry. It's magnetic, anomalous. Compasses twitch here. Metal detectors go haywire. The ground itself remembers things. Like an old cassette tape with songs no one recorded but you somehow know the words to anyway. And those songs, they're in the shapes. Some researchers believe the figures are more than art. They're frequencies mapped visually, like somatics, where sound vibrations create patterns in sand or water. The hummingbird, A tone. The spiral, A harmonic loop. The monkey with the curlicue tail, a field map. Nazca wasn't drawing animals. They were drawing resonance. And what if these weren't made from the ground up, but from the sky down? What if a civilization once flew, glided, hovered, soared, and mapped their messages from above, not to show off, to maintain contact with each other, with the stars, with something waiting? And then the moon locked in, the air thickened, the frequencies scrambled, and Nazca went quiet, but not erased, just waiting for someone to walk the lines again. You begin to follow one, a spiral. It curves slowly at first, then tighter. You walk it like a labyrinth, feeling something shift in your chest, not emotionally, physically, like a pressure equalizing, like something clicking. And suddenly you're not on the line. You are the line. You're the signal. A being once stood here ages ago with bare feet and a copper staff, humming a single tone into the wind until the dust itself aligned. Until the sky responded. Until the line was drawn, not with tools, but with intention. You blink and the desert returns, but the resonance lingers. You sit for a moment staring at the monkey geoglyph in the distance. Its finger points not at the sky, but slightly downward, toward the ground. You understand now. The Nazca weren't worshipping above. They were activating below. This whole region, some believe, sits atop an energetic grid, a ley line nexus, an underground library of frequencies stored in crystal, mineral, and bone. And the geoglyphs, they're not messages to the stars. They're keys. Keys that only work when walked, sung, felt, and those who knew how they weren't primitives. They weren't guessing. They were technicians of the sacred, engineers of frequency, builders of memory not from stone, but from tone. You stand again. The desert stretches endlessly, silent, patient, and yet you hear something, a low hum, not in your ears, in your teeth. It vibrates behind your eyes just long enough to remind you that the message isn't lost, just waiting to be heard by the right frequency. And maybe, just maybe, you're beginning to match it, because the moon may dull our senses, but it can't erase the design, not from the desert, not from the earth, and certainly not from you. You walk one more line. This one is straight, long, vanishing into the horizon like a sentence unfinished. And as you walk it, you don't wonder anymore what the lines mean. You wonder what happens when they respond. The desert air fades behind you like a long exhale, and suddenly the ground softens. Not physically, but geologically. The landscape turns green, then gray, then damp with a kind of ancient breath. You're no longer walking in sun-scorched silence. You're walking among megaliths, not the kind tourists climb for Instagram. The kind that make your skin crawl, not from fear, but from realization. Because you've arrived at Göbekli Tepe. It's in Turkey, though. It doesn't feel like Turkey. It doesn't feel like anywhere on the map. This place isn't ancient in the usual sense. It's pre-ancient. So old, it rewrites what ancient even means. 11,600 years ago. Let that number sink in. That's before writing, before pottery, before the wheel. Before agriculture had really taken hold, when humans were supposedly still banging rocks together and chasing antelope with pointy sticks. But at Göbekli Tepe, they built temples, not huts, not fire pits. Temples, and not just any temples. Circular enclosures made of 10-20-foot tall T-shaped limestone pillars, many weighing over 10 tons. Carved with animals, foxes, birds, scorpions. Some say constellations. Some say code. The site was discovered in the 1990s, and it turned everything upside down because it proved that complex religious architecture came before civilization, not after. Let that rearrange your brain. Historians still debate whether Göbekli Tepe was a temple, a calendar, an observatory, or a ritual center. But what's less debated is this: it shouldn't exist, not that early, not that advanced, and yet it does. You run your hand along one of the standing stones. It's smooth, cool, carved with symbols that don't just feel decorative, they feel deliberate. Like they were placed there by someone who knew exactly what they were trying to remember. And then get this, it was buried. That's right. Sometime after it was built, the people who made Göbekli Tepe covered it up. Deliberately, carefully. They didn't abandon it. They entombed it. Why? Maybe to preserve it. Maybe to protect it. Or maybe because they knew what was coming. A forgetting, a shift in frequency, a moonrise, and they wanted to hide the memory before it could be erased. What if Göbekli Tepe isn't just a temple? What if it's a time capsule? A signal from a time when humanity, or something like it, was tuned to a different vibration. Before duality, before division, before time became a jailer, a time when memory was carved into stone because no other material could hold it long enough. You walk around one of the circles. The pillars aren't randomly placed. They're arranged in patterns that may reflect star positions or vibrational harmonics. Many point to the Sirius system. Remember the Dogon? Yeah. That connection just looped back around. You're starting to see the pattern. Stone, star, sound, signal. It's not random. It's resonant. The same hum you felt in Nazca, in Petra, in Puma Punku, you feel it here too. A low subsonic pulse, like a tuning fork buried beneath the earth, is still ringing, waiting for someone with the right ears to stop walking and listen. You sit on the edge of one of the rings, not inside. That would feel wrong, disrespectful. This is not a place for selfies. This is a lens, not for the sky, for the soul. You close your eyes, and for a moment the scene shifts. No tourists, no fencing, just stars above, brighter, closer, and beings around you. Tall, silent, clothed in nothing but presence. They move slowly, deliberately placing each stone not for power or glory, but for alignment. They don't speak. They sing tones that shape matter vibrations that bend light. They aren't building a monument, they're building a memory. And then one of them looks at you, not with eyes, with knowing. And you understand, this place isn't a relic. It's a reminder, a memory made physical buried not because it failed, but because it had to be saved. Because the moon had arrived, and the forgetting had begun. You open your eyes, back in the now. But it feels thinner, like a curtain you just saw behind. Göbekli Tepe wasn't the beginning of civilization. It was the end of something greater. The final note in a song we no longer remember how to sing. And maybe it's why you're here now, to remember the tune. You stand. The air vibrates slightly, not with sound, with recognition. You walk toward the next circle, and you don't say a word, because Göbekli Tepe doesn't want your voice. It wants your resonance. The pillars of Göbekli Tepe fade into the dust behind you like a dream you're sure you didn't invent. Their shapes still echo behind your eyelids even after you turn away. And now, the land has grown quieter, not emptier, but more internal. You're no longer stepping through monuments or walking across forgotten megastructures. You're entering the mind of an ancient civilization. This is Sumer, the cradle of civilization. The place where history decided to start telling itself in clay instead of wind. And yet, what we call the beginning might actually be the very tail end of something far older. You're walking through what used to be Eridu, the first city according to Sumerian tradition. Not Uruk, not Ur. Eridu, a city founded by the gods themselves. Specifically by Enki, the god of water wisdom, mischief, and underground reservoirs of knowledge. Eridu wasn't just a city, it was the prototype. The cosmic blueprint for all others. A sacred center. A place of descending. Or redescending. Because here's the oddity, the Sumerians didn't say they invented civilization. They said it was given to them by the Anunnaki. And that word, you've heard it before. Sky beings, star kings, engineers of humanity, or perhaps something more complicated. Here in Eridu, you see what's left mud brick foundations, fragments of temples, and the ever-present whisper of water running somewhere below the surface. The Tigris and Euphrates carved this land into memory, and in those memories were stories, and in those stories were truths. The Sumerians wrote about beings descending from the sky not once, but repeatedly. They brought knowledge, language, mathematics, astronomy, architecture, kingship. Yes, kingship. They didn't evolve it. They were handed it. From above, one of the oldest known lists of kings in the world, the Sumerian king list, tells a chilling story. It doesn't begin with once upon a time. It begins with kingship was lowered from heaven. Let that line sit with you. Lowered, like a frequency, like a structure, placed atop something, not invented, not seized, given. And here's where it gets stranger. The list goes on to describe rulers who reigned for thousands of years, some for 800 years, others for $36,000. It's not a typo. The list is clear. These were the rulers before the flood. Historians still debate whether these were mythic exaggerations or misunderstood calendar systems. But what if they weren't? What if these kings lived in a time before our DNA shortened, before the atmosphere changed, before the moon set the rhythm of death? You pause beside what was once a ziggurat. The air is heavy with heat and memory. There's nothing towering left here, but the footprint remains, and you feel it. This was a place of interface, not just prayer, contact, communication between those above and those below, not heaven and earth, dimension and density, Some say the Sumerian pantheon wasn't just a religious idea, it was an organizational chart, a map of energies, intelligences, beings assigned to different functions of planetary care. And Enki, he wasn't just a trickster, he was a gatekeeper. Of water, yes, but also of knowledge. He created Adapa, the prototype human. Remember him, the one who turned down immortality on the advice of the one who made him. That story happened here, and maybe it wasn't a mistake. Maybe Adapa was never meant to live forever in a broken system. Maybe he was meant to remember. You walk now beside the canals that once fed the gardens of gods. There's nothing left but dry channels and weeds, but you can almost hear them flowing with water that remembered where it had been before the moon. Because the Sumerians also had myths of a time before duality, before sleep, before forgetting. They spoke of Dilmun, the pure land where lions didn't devour, snakes didn't bite, and the elderly didn't age. Sound familiar? It should. It's not a paradise, it's a before. Before the moon brought tidal cycles. Before the veil of time separated knowing from being. Before mortality became mandatory. So what happened? Why fall? Why forget? The stories point again and again to a conflict between gods, between priorities, between those who wanted to uplift and those who wanted control. Enki versus Enlil. Water versus wind. Memory versus structure. And in the middle, us. You kneel by the dry ground and pick up a shard of clay, once part of a tablet, once inscribed with a symbol, once wet with intent, and now dust. But symbols survive. And the Sumerians were obsessed with them. Cuneiform wasn't just a language. It was compression. Information turned into sound, turned into shape, turned into vibration. Each wedge, each line a chord, and when arranged just right, they didn't just tell stories. They could change things. Scribes were more than writers. They were engineers of reality. Because Sumer didn't record history, it stored memory, and you somehow are remembering it now. You place the shard back on the ground, not to discard it, to respect it. You rise and look at the skyline. Flat, empty, except for one pale curve on the horizon, the moon, just rising. And somehow it looks smug, like it knows how much has been buried. But you smile anyway, because now you know something it doesn't. Memory isn't a thing you carry in your head. It's a field. And the field is waking up. You leave the cradle of kings behind, stepping over dry reeds and ancient furrows as the sky slowly darkens overhead. Not with night, but with something heavier. The kind of darkness that doesn't hide. It reveals, and in this darkness, a city. No roads lead to it. No maps mark it. But it rises all the same. Welcome to Derinkuyu. You're underground now, not metaphorically, but physically. Beneath the soft rock plains of Cappadocia in central Turkey lies one of the most astonishing architectural feats of the ancient world. A fully formed multi-level city dug deep into the earth itself. Not a basement, a labyrinth. Derinkuyu stretches more than 200 feet down with over 18 levels of rooms, corridors, air shafts, wells, and massive rolling stone doors that could seal entire chambers from the inside. Estimates suggest it could house 20,000 people livestock, included for months at a time. But here's the mystery. No one really knows who built it, or why. The earliest written references to the underground cities of Cappadocia are only a few centuries old. But the construction itself, some geologists suggest it may be at least 3,000 years old. Others whisper older dates, much older. And here's the oddest part. It wasn't built all at once. It was expanded, generation after generation, digging deeper, widening the network, reinforcing walls until it became a kind of subterranean warren, protected, hidden, forgotten. Why? Theories abound. To hide from invaders, plausible. To escape harsh climates, maybe. But what if it wasn't built to hide from Earth? What if it was built to escape the sky? You descend further now. The light fades. The air thickens, not with dust, but resonance. Each room has a strange acoustic signature. Your footsteps don't echo, they sink, as if the very walls absorb sound like memory foam for sound waves. And here's where things get weirder. The architecture is perfectly engineered. Ventilation shafts snake down through the rock, providing fresh air even in the deepest chambers. Wells supply water. There are stables, kitchens, schools, even churches. It's not a shelter. It's a civilization cocoon, built not in panic, but in preparation. Some believe Derinkuyu and other underground cities in the region were part of a planetary warning system created after some cataclysmic event, or in anticipation of one, a flood perhaps, or something else, maybe a frequency shift. You've seen this pattern before. Civilizations that seem to vanish. Structures buried, submerged, sealed, not broken, not abandoned, hidden. And Derinkuyu fits too well. This wasn't a reaction to a war. This was an escape from a vibration. Think about it. If something in the sky changed the way we think, the way we perceive time and reality, how would you protect the memory of before? You'd go underground. You'd silence the noise. You'd insulate yourself from the hum of forgetfulness. You'd wait. You pause in a wide chamber that feels different. The ceiling is lower, the air cooler. And then you realize this room isn't round or square. It's octagonal. Why? That shape doesn't serve a structural purpose, but it might serve a symbolic one. 8 has always been the number of balance, of transition, of stepping out of the 7-day cycle, of moving beyond time. And perhaps in this room, they remembered how. You sit against the cool wall, and for just a moment, you feel safe, not in a survivalist way, in a cellular way, like your DNA is exhaling, because this place wasn't built by frightened people hiding from raiders. It was built by a people who knew the moon would change everything, knew memory would fragment, knew light would lie, so they burrowed downward not to flee, but to preserve. Some say underground cities like this are still active, that beneath the feet of sleepy towns in Anatolia, whole populations live quiet, invisible lives, not in fear, in witness, waiting for the hum of the old world to return. And others claim that Derinkuyu is more than it seems, that the corridors continue deeper than archaeologists have dared to go, that there's a level below the lowest level, sealed, untouched, still humming, a room where something was stored, not treasure, not scrolls, but tone, a pure frequency, the uncorrupted before. You run your fingers along the stone again. It feels warm, familiar, like Göbekli Tepe, like Petra, like Nazca. But here the feeling is inverted, not up and out, down and in. And maybe that's the secret, that the old ones didn't reach upward for answers. They dug. They knew memory isn't in the sky, it's in the earth. And sometimes the only way to ascend is to descend. You rise, carefully, quietly, and make your way back toward the surface. It takes longer than you remember. Or maybe time's just different down here. You emerge, blinking into the light. The world is still turning, the moon's still watching, but under your feet, still humming, still waiting. And now, So are you. The light hits your face again, almost too bright after so much time underground. But it's not just your eyes adjusting, it's your perception. The world looks slightly wrong, too sharp, too fast. You blink, and for just a moment, everything feels pixelated, like reality is running at a lower resolution than you remember, because now you've entered the realm of simulation. Not the digital kind exactly, but the question. You walk through a dry plain. No ruins, no stonework, nothing obviously ancient. But you know somehow this is one of the oldest places of all, because this is the place where people started wondering, is any of this real? Long before Elon, before Reddit, before computers could play chess or draw portraits, civilizations were whispering that the world might not be what it seems. That time could be rigged. That thoughts might not be yours. That the sky might be fabricated. And the stars, well, those might be the backdrop. You sit down in the dust. It's oddly smooth, like it's been rendered. In ancient India, there was a concept called Maya, not as in the civilization, but as in illusion. A shimmering veil between what we perceive and what is. Reality, the sages said, was a dream. Not metaphorically, a literal dream. One so convincing we forgot we were dreaming. In Gnostic texts, the world is the creation not of the true God, but a false architect, the demiurge, who copied light and locked it into matter. Sound familiar? A system created to imprison souls, not by chains, by repetition. And what if the moon, oh yes, always back to that glowing sentinel, wasn't just a regulator of tides? What if it was the projector, the thing that keeps the dream running, the hard drive in the sky? You stand again. The breeze moves strangely here, not like air should, more like someone tweaking the gravity settings. And now you remember something, the Zhuangzi butterfly paradox. An ancient Chinese tale where the philosopher Zhuangzi dreams he's a butterfly. Upon waking, he wonders, was he a man dreaming he was a butterfly, or a butterfly dreaming he was a man? That wasn't a bedtime puzzle. It was a warning. The simulation idea isn't new. It's ancient. The Hopi spoke of a fourth world, a version of Earth we live in now layered atop three older, more harmonious ones that collapsed due to imbalance. Each world, they say, was more artificial than the last, more detached from the original frequency. Each one fell when its people forgot how to live in balance, like a simulation restarted, and every time it resets, something is lost. You look up, and there it is, the moon, but now it doesn't look like a moon. It looks like an eye, unblinking, too round, too perfect. Scientists admit the moon is weird. Its size and distance create the perfect solar eclipse. It rings like a bell when struck by impact. Its dust is older than its rocks, and beneath its surface, a vacuum, or possibly a shell. Some theorists believe it's hollow, not metaphorically, mechanically. A constructed object placed in orbit designed to regulate Earth's rotation electromagnetic field, and perhaps consciousness itself. Think of it this way. If the Earth is a stage, the moon is the light rig. If Earth is a game, the moon is the loading screen. And the stars. Wallpaper. You step across a patch of ground that seems newer, like it was generated more recently than the rest. Maybe this whole section of Earth is buffering. Maybe you're buffering. Somewhere in the distance, a crow calls, but it's late. There are no birds here. So why did you hear it? Because the simulation needed a sound, a cue, something familiar to keep you calm. But you're not calm anymore. You're aware. And that changes everything. Maybe this is what the ancient temples were, for not to worship gods, but to reconnect to the real. A signal boost to the outside. A way to remember that the world is not the default state. It's the interface. And you were never meant to be a passive user. You were meant to wake up. Somewhere behind your thoughts, you feel it a glitch. A moment of resonance. A shimmer in the fabric of things. The hum in Petra. The lines in Nazca. The buried tones in Derinkuyu. They weren't decorations. They were interrupts. Commands in the code. Messages meant to break the loop. And maybe that's what the moon fears most. Not rebellion, not revolution. Awareness. Because once you're aware of the simulation, you're outside of it. You can't unsee it. You can't be reinstalled. You look down at your hands. They look like yours. But now you wonder, have they always looked this way? And if not, what did they used to be? The wind picks up again. Too clean, too staged, like a fan blowing through a movie set. And somewhere in the distance, you hear it again. That tone, soft, persistent, sustained level. You smile, because now you know what it is. It's the exit prompt. You stand in the middle of nowhere, or what looks like nowhere. The simulation has quieted like a video game that's frozen just before a crash. The sky doesn't quite move. The air tastes still. Even your thoughts feel padded like someone applied noise canceling to your own brain. But beneath your feet, there's motion, a slow churn. And this time, you're not on a continent. You're on Mu, or what's left of it. You've heard of Atlantis. It gets all the attention, all the memes. But Mu is the ghost continent, the older one, the quieter one, the wider one. Where Atlantis was, a city Mu, was a civilization continent said to span from the coast of South America to Asia, across the vast, deep Pacific. Lemuria, Pan, the motherland, the first world. The names differ, but the idea remains constant. A lost land swallowed by the ocean, but not because it failed, because it knew. You look out over what's now just sea, an endless glimmering plain of blue. But you're not seeing waves anymore. You're seeing structures, patterns beneath the surface, ridges too sharp to be tectonic plateaus, too symmetrical to be chance. Sonar scans taken from various parts of the Pacific reveal strange anomalies, pyramid-like shapes off the coast of Japan, vast walls near Micronesia, submerged roads near Easter Island. These aren't random coral formations. They're fragments. Mu, if it existed, didn't disappear all at once. It crumbled. It retreated. Piece by piece, temple by temple, node by node. A global withdrawal into myth. But the myth survived in Polynesian legends, in Tamil writings, in the stony silence of Easter Island's Moai, whose backs face the sea as if guarding against something they remember, and we've forgotten. The people of Mu, according to esoteric accounts, weren't just builders. They were harmonists. They aligned their cities with star paths and ocean currents. They used resonant stone tuned to the Earth's own heartbeat. Their architecture sang not to the sky, but into the planet. Not up, down. Mu was not a culture of conquest. It was a planetary steward, but something shifted, and maybe it wasn't their fault. Some say Mu's end came through natural cataclysm, a tectonic convulsion that cracked the Pacific plate and pulled the whole continent under. But others say it was engineered, A war, a frequency war, not with bombs, but with vibration. The story goes that Atlantis and Mu were once twin civilizations complementary, like the hemispheres of a brain. Mu, the intuitive one. Atlantis, the rational. Mu resonated with the earth. Atlantis reached for the sky. And like all siblings, they eventually fell into conflict. The Atlanteans developed technologies to manipulate matter gravity and thought. The Murians countered with frequency alignment, a kind of planetary tuning that could calm storms grow. Food healed trauma. Where Atlantis built machines, Mu became them, and in the end, one had to go. But Mu didn't fight back, it withdrew. It understood that some knowledge could only survive through echo, so it sang its own civilization into the ocean and left keys behind. You walk now across an island that barely registers on maps. Maybe it's a reef. Maybe it's a mountain's last breath. But the rocks beneath your feet are geometric, worn but shaped, flat-topped, interlocked, like the ruins at Nan Madol, or Yonaguni, or Bimini. You kneel, you touch one, and you hear it, low, a hum, not a sound, exactly more like a feeling that buzzes just beneath the bones. Like the earth is remembering you. Mu may have fallen, but it didn't disappear. It coded itself into the planet, into water, into vibration. And those who know how to listen, they can still hear it, not with ears, with intention. That's why so many sacred sites across the Pacific and Indian Oceans feel connected even when separated by thousands of miles. Easter Island, Hawaii, Fiji, Tamil Nadu. They weren't just settlements. They were outposts, receivers, and the priests. The stone, carvers, the quiet dreamers. They weren't just keeping tradition. They were keeping resonance alive, like tuning forks in flesh, like backup servers for planetary memory. And what if that's you? A piece of that signal, a carrier of tone. You stand now at the island's edge. The tide pulls against your toes, gentle, rhythmic, almost musical. You wonder how deep Mu really went. Some say there were cities in crystal powered by the Earth's magnetic lines. Others claim the Murians communicated with whales, used their songs as modulators for intercontinental thought. It sounds ridiculous until you remember the dolphins in Atlantis, the cymatic carvings in Egypt, the hum of stone in Göbekli Tepe. They weren't separate stories. They were one story fractured by water and time and forgetting. And Mu was the first verse, the one that set the key, the one we've been trying to match ever since. You look to the horizon, nothing but blue, and yet you feel something rise within you. Not nostalgia, recognition. Because this isn't just a story about what was lost. It's a story about what was saved. By water, by whales, by wind, by you. The sea behind you flattens into glass like it's holding its breath. You turn inland and everything shifts. The air gets heavier, but not with heat, with presence. As if the ground remembers being something else. Something holy. Something terrifying. You're walking into Egypt now. Not the Egypt of tour buses and postcards. Not the pyramids you've memorized from history class. This Egypt is quieter, older, stranger. A version that exists just outside the textbooks and deep inside your bones. You stand before the Great Sphinx, and it stares right through you. This isn't the cheerful guardian of the Giza Plateau you've seen 1,000 times on documentaries. This one is eroded, broken, angry, and maybe a little tired of being misunderstood. Let's start with the obvious. The Sphinx is old, But how old exactly? That's the question that haunts everything here. Most Egyptologists say it was carved around 2500 BCE by the pharaoh Khafra. Makes for a neat story. But geology tells a different tale. The weathering patterns on the body of the Sphinx, deep vertical fissures, suggest water erosion, heavy sustained rainfall. But the last time Egypt experienced that kind of climate, more than 10,000 years ago, historians still debate whether the Sphinx predates the dynastic Egyptians or whether its head was recarved, later shrinking from a larger original. But the truth is, no one knows for sure. And that alone is huge. Because if the Sphinx is older than the pyramids, older than agriculture, it means someone, some civilization, was building monuments before we even knew how to write our names. And what were they trying to preserve? You walk slowly around the Sphinx. It doesn't blink. It doesn't speak. But it hums. A low granite grumble. Not sound. Memory. You can feel it in your chest. This isn't a statue. It's a lock. Not for treasure. For truth. And maybe it's already starting to open. Because we're in the middle of the Sphinx's return. Archaeologists and alternative researchers alike have been zeroing in on something called the Hall of Records, a supposed chamber beneath the Sphinx's paws, long rumored to contain the memory of the before. Maps, scrolls, technology, proof. In the 1990s, seismic scans revealed anomalies, empty cavities directly beneath the monument, but digging denied. Why? Because if the chamber exists, and if it holds what some suspect, it would change everything. It would mean we've been reset. That civilization isn't a straight line from caves to cities, but a loop. One that rises, falls, forgets, and remembers. And the Sphinx, it's the marker, the guardian of the loop. But that's just the beginning. You walk toward the Great Pyramid now. It's close enough to touch, and you do. The limestone is smoother than expected, colder, and far more precise. The Great Pyramid isn't just big, it's impossibly perfect, aligned within a fraction of a degree to true north. Constructed from over 2 million blocks, some weighing as much as 80 tons. Placed with tolerances so exact that modern architects still argue about how it was done. No mortar, just fit. The base of the pyramid is a perfect square, its perimeter matching the Earth's equator to pole ratio, and its height corresponding mathematically to the planet's radius. Accidental? Maybe once, but not everywhere. Because these proportions show up again and again. In Angkor Wat, in Stonehenge, in Teotihuacan, different cultures, same code. Which means the pyramids weren't tombs, they were machines. Some theorists believe the Great Pyramid was a kind of harmonic generator, that the king's chamber, made of pink granite, resonated with the Earth's natural frequency, that it could amplify consciousness, heal DNA, or even store memory, because the ancient Egyptians didn't believe in death the way we do. To them, the body was a temporary container. The Ka, the spirit, could survive, but only if it was encoded properly. And that's what these chambers were for. Encoding, not of corpses, of consciousness. The pyramid wasn't a burial site. It was a launch pad, a trans-dimensional interface that could lock onto memory, amplify intention, and possibly exit the loop. And the moon, it probably hates that. Because once you realize the loop exists, and once you realize you've been here before, the next step is figuring out how to leave. You sit at the base of the pyramid, your back against 50-ton stones placed with laser-like precision. The sky is clear, but it feels hollow. like something is watching. And it is, that ever-present moon. Bright, pale, unnatural. You think about the ancient Egyptian god, Thoth, keeper of knowledge, lord of writing, scribe of the gods, sometimes associated with the moon. But here's the twist: Thoth wasn't just a god. He was a system, a mechanism for recording memory across incarnations, for making sure knowledge didn't die. And where did Thoth store that knowledge? In tablets, made not of paper, but of light. The emerald tablets. Whether myth or metaphor, tell a strange story of beings from Atlantis, of resurrection, of transmutation, of remembering what you really are. You stand again, the Great Pyramid behind you, the Sphinx still watching, and suddenly Egypt doesn't feel like the past. It feels like a map, a user manual for human consciousness. And maybe you were never meant to understand it with your mind. Maybe it's a song you remember, even now, especially now, because the Sphinx hasn't forgotten, and the pyramid hasn't stopped humming. And you're getting closer. You leave Egypt slowly, like pulling a thread from something woven too tight. The stones resist you. The air clings. Even your thoughts don't want to go. But you keep moving because something is calling from farther east. Something colder, quieter, not forgotten, just frozen. You're walking into Siberia now, specifically into the murky depths of a mystery that most people have never heard of. The Valley of the Dead. It sounds like a horror movie. And honestly, it feels like one. The region is in Yakutia, one of the most remote and inhospitable places on Earth. Vast frozen tundra. Permafrost so deep it could store secrets for millennia. And apparently that's exactly what it's doing, because scattered across this isolated land are the remnants of something wrong. They call them the Olgi structures, enormous metal domes buried partially beneath the earth. Smooth, hollow, unexplained. Too regular to be natural, too strange to be accepted as ancient. The locals won't go near them. The indigenous Evenki people speak of sickness of hair falling out of dreams filled with mechanical voices. Some say the domes move. Others say they listen. A few believe they were planted there, not by humans, but by something watching. And here's the truly bizarre part. No official archaeological expeditions have been able or willing to fully document them. Satellite imagery is inconclusive. Access is nearly impossible. The land refuses to yield its secrets, and yet they're still there. You walk across the ice. The wind is so cold, it feels like it's trying to erase your face. But something ahead glows not visually, magnetically, like a place where the simulation has to work harder to keep the story consistent. You find one of the domes, half buried, half asleep. It's not rusted. It's not cracked. It looks alive, not like a creature, like a system, a node that someone forgot to shut down. Some researchers believe these structures could be remnants of an ancient defense grid. Against what? Comets? Aliens? Time. Others think they're reactors' energy points for a now-lost power network that once crisscrossed the globe like invisible ley lines. And some say they're sentient, not intelligent like humans, just aware, like the Earth's version of neurons, ancient, quiet, but still running. You step closer, and the air shifts. Sound disappears, not muffled, deleted. Like stepping into a zone where the rules are different. Gravity doesn't tug quite the same. Your heartbeat feels like it's coming from outside your body. This place is wrong, or maybe it's too right. Maybe it's what Earth used to feel like before the noise, before the moon, because that's what keeps coming back, isn't it? That pattern, memory encoded in stone, in vibration, in structure, and in these domes, maybe in containment. Maybe these are black boxes from a forgotten era, not meant to be opened, meant to survive. One story from the locals claims these domes were used to shoot fiery arrows at things from the sky. Comets, ships, frequencies, and whatever they were, the implication is clear. Something came, and these were built to push it back. But push what? You walk around the edge. There are no markings, no doors, no visible seams. But there's a hum. Of course there is. Every place you visited, Nazca, Göbekli Tepe, Petra, the pyramids, they all hum. So why wouldn't this? Except here it's deeper, lower, like a warning or a heartbeat. You touch it. It vibrates under your palm, and suddenly you see it not physically, but in that dream space you keep slipping into. You see the world before the fall, cities made of light, oceans that shimmered with memory, the sky open, and then something falling. Not fire, not water, a signal, a frequency that changed the rules, slowed everything down, introduced death. And the people of that age, they didn't run, they didn't panic, they prepared, they buried these nodes, not just to survive but to remind. And now here you are, unburying the signal, remembering the hum. You pull your hand back, the cold rushes in again, but this time it feels good, real, clarifying. Because now you understand, the Valley of the Dead wasn't a battlefield, it was a firewall, the edge of a system designed to contain forgetting, to preserve the truth in pockets deep buried, frozen, safe from the moon. You take one last look. The dome doesn't blink, doesn't move, but you feel it noticing you, just for a second, and then you walk away, back across the ice, back toward the part of the world still pretending to be warm. And the dome, it keeps humming, because that's what it was built to do. Hold the tone until someone comes back to listen. You walk south now, away from the cold and the silence, into something older, not by time, but by memory. The landscape softens again, but the weight in your chest grows heavier. Not fear. Something else. Something that says, this is where it began. And it's not a city you're headed toward. It's a mountain, but not just any mountain. This is Mount Kailash, towering in Tibet, too sacred to be climbed, too symmetrical to be natural, and too unknown to ever feel fully explained. Some call it the Axis Mundi, the world's spiritual center. Others say it's the crown of the earth, the head of a body too massive to see. But the locals, they don't climb it. They walk around it. Thousands of pilgrims make the journey every year, performing a ritual circumambulation called the Kora, tracing a 32-mile loop around the base. One full circuit is said to cleanse a lifetime of karma, 100 enlightenment. But no one climbs the mountain because it's not meant to be climbed, and maybe not because it's sacred. Maybe because it's alive. You approach the base. The air is thin here, but it doesn't feel weak. It feels compressed, like the pressure of a deep ocean only inverted, pushing down from above. The mountain slopes gleam unnaturally white, and its four faces align perfectly with the cardinal directions. Coincidence? Not here. Because Kailash isn't just sacred to one religion. It's revered by four: Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Bon. And they all agree on one thing. This mountain is not of this world. In Hindu myth, Kailash is the home of Shiva, the destroyer not of life, but of illusion, the cosmic dancer, the one who ends cycles so new ones can begin. His trident pierces dimensions. His gaze turns ignorance to ash. And where does he live? At the center, the axis, the still point of the turning wheel. You walk the path now, the Cora clockwise. 1 foot after the other, the landscape beginning to dissolve into symbolism. You're no longer hiking, you're unwinding yourself. And with every step, the earth feels more sentient, more like a machine with heart. Mount Kailash, according to ancient texts, is connected to a mirror mountain, Mount Meru, an invisible fifth-dimensional twin. Some even believe the mountain is hollow, or worse, not hollow, but encoded, because when you overlay the structure of Kailash with the shape of ancient pyramids, the proportions are eerily similar. The slope of the sides, the height to base ratio almost identical. But who built a pyramid here, and why? Historians still debate whether Kailash is a natural formation or a remnant of a forgotten megalithic age. Some geologists note its unnaturally straight ridges and radial drainage system water flows from its base into 4 of Asia's greatest rivers, like a central node powering multiple directions. Rivers that gave birth to civilization. From one mountain, what if it's not just a mountain? What if it's a transmitter, a sacred processor, humming with codes that regulate spiritual memory on a planetary scale? Maybe the real reason it's never been climbed is because climbing it would be like stepping on a motherboard. You stop halfway through your circuit. The wind has gone silent, and then a tone, not from the mountain, from within you, like something is being turned on. You see symbols, Tibetan scripts, Sanskrit mantras, spirals, waves. But they're not separate. They're layers of the same language, a vibrational instruction set. And you realize something that was never said, only felt. Mount Kailash isn't just a sacred place, it's a portal, not to another world, to the center of this one. You sit down on a flat rock, and the mountain notices you, not as a threat, as a participant, a piece of a memory loop beginning to reboot, and somewhere, very far beneath your feet, or maybe above your thoughts, you feel the whole mountain shift, not physically, energetically, like it's recognizing your frequency, like it's saying, yes, you've come back. You close your eyes, and you see it all, not as hallucination, as confirmation. Lines of energy pulsing outward from this mountain like neural pathways, lighting up temples, cities' ruins across the globe. Not random, not separate, all connected, all part of a circuit. And Mount Kailash, the processor, the switch, the heartbeat. You open your eyes. The light has changed. Everything glows just a little more subtly, but enough that the shadows are deeper, and the colors feel earned. You've walked the circuit. You've completed the loop, but the loop isn't the trap. It's the key, because the old ones didn't build these places to trap you in memory. They built them to help you survive it, to remember it, to harmonize. And Mount Kailash, it's not waiting for worship. It's waiting for activation. And maybe, just maybe, you've already done it. You descend the sacred spiral of Kailash, but your feet don't quite touch the ground. The air feels charged the way it does just before a thunderstorm or a revelation. Everything is too still, and yet beneath that stillness, something is vibrating. Not you, not the earth, everything. You've reached the edge of the story now. But instead of clarity, you're met with mist. A fog not of confusion, but of layered truths, each one half hidden, each one waiting to be unwrapped like a puzzle box made of memory and time. Because you're no longer walking through civilizations. You're walking through fractures, cracks in the narrative, places where the official history stutters and skips like a scratched record. You're in the realm of the forbidden zones now, the forgotten anomalies, those strange, unplaceable mysteries that didn't fit anywhere else but somehow fit together perfectly. Take Lake Vostok, for instance. Buried beneath 2 miles of Antarctic ice, it's one of the largest freshwater lakes in the world, and it's been sealed off for over 15 million years. Untouched, isolated, preserved like a time capsule from a world no one remembers. And under that ice, magnetic anomalies, geometric readings, grids that don't belong. Some even believe there's an ancient structure down there, an ark, a base, or a library. But no one knows for sure, because just as scientists were about to drill into the lake's core, the operation stopped. Suddenly, quietly. Why? That's where the silence starts to get suspicious. Or consider the Tartaria phenomenon. Supposedly, a once global civilization erased from history. Vanished maps, overwritten architecture, star forts, onion domes, old world buildings that show up on every continent, too advanced for their time, too similar to be coincidence. Were they built by giants, by sound, by a civilization that understood frequency better than we understand Wi-Fi? Mainstream historians scoff. But the buildings remain. Ornate, harmonious, vibrationally resonant. Like someone tried to build music into matter and then just disappeared. You turn your attention now to the Baltic Sea anomaly. Discovered in 2011, it looks like a crashed spaceship. No joke. Circular, ridged, with what appears to be a stair-like formation leading to a central dome. Resting 300 feet beneath the surface, half buried in seabed silt. Skeptics call it a rock, but the sonar says otherwise. Straight lines, sharp angles, burn marks on the seabed. And again, that same feeling. That this isn't a crash site. It's a beacon, a node, waiting. You see the pattern, don't you? Islands of memory, buried in ice, hidden in architecture, encoded in geometry. Every single one humming the same tune in a dozen different octaves. And the moon. It's always there, watching, not passively, actively. Because the more you look into these places, the more you try to connect them, the more resistance you feel. Closed sites, blocked access, stories, discredited before they're even told. Why? Because memory is dangerous, especially when it starts syncing up, especially when people like you, people walking slowly, listening closely, begin to hear the same song. You stop in the center of what might once have been a plaza. The ground beneath you is cracked but deliberate, like a star fort with its arms torn off. You kneel, and this time, instead of touching stone, you touch signal. There's no artifact, no statue, just vibration, raw and clean and almost familiar. You close your eyes, and it all unfolds, not in sequence, in resonance. Mu, Atlantis, Göbekli Tepe, Petra, Nazca, the Sphinx, Derinkuyu, Kailash, all of it, not separate civilizations, but symptoms of a deeper structure, a global operating system before the flood, before the moon, before forgetting became standard. And now, you've heard the tone again. So what happens next? You stand. The fog begins to lift, but not with answers, with possibility. Because here's the secret. No one carved in stone. No one wrote in cuneiform. No one buried beneath pyramids. The truth was never lost. It was scattered, like puzzle pieces launched across time, each one humming, waiting for someone who remembered the shape of the whole. And maybe that's you, not a prophet, not a chosen one, just someone who listened long enough for the hum to become a song, long enough to realize that the song is ancient and that you already know the words. You take a deep breath, There's a weight in your chest, not fear, not fatigue, but gravity. Like the world has leaned in a little closer, holding its breath along with you. And now, everything that once felt like myth, it feels like context. You're back where you started, but nothing is the same, because now you're not just seeing the surface. You're seeing the layer beneath the scaffolding of memory, the architecture of forgetting. And at the center of it all, still floating, still glowing, still silent, the moon. But now you see it for what it is, not just a satellite, not just a light in the sky, a machine. Call it artificial. Call it placed. Call it coincidence if you like. But the data keeps whispering the moon shouldn't be there. Not like that. Not in that orbit. Not with that size. Not with that density. And certainly not with those effects. Because the moment the moon arrived, whenever that really was, everything changed. Tides began. Cycles emerged. Menstruation aligned. Plants tilted. Migration shifted. Animals danced to lunar rhythms. And humans we started to forget. Not just information, ourselves. Because the moon didn't just pull at the oceans. It pulled at consciousness. Ancient myths describe it as an eye, a watcher, a gate, a trap. Some even call it a soul catcher, a device that keeps you cycling, incarnating, looping back again and again through the same patterns, the same karma, the same dream. You're born, you live, you die, you return. Why? Because you forgot the exit, the tone. And that's what all of this has been, hasn't it? A journey to remember, to stitch together fragments left by those who did remember. The engineers of memory, the builders of resonance, the singers of stone. They weren't trying to dominate. They were trying to remind you that there was a time before the loop, before the moon, before amnesia became the water we swim in. You look up at the moon now, and it looks different. Still round, still pale, but less glorious. More like a lid, a seal, a hatch. You think back to the stories, the ancient cultures that warned against going to the moon. The idea that there were once two moons. That one replaced the other. That something was hidden inside. And those moonquakes, when Apollo missions struck it with equipment, the moon rang like a bell, hollow, constructed, engineered. But engineered for what? Some say control, some say observation, but others say the moon was built as a correction, a patch in the code, inserted to slow down human evolution after a leap too far too fast. That when civilizations began to reach beyond the veil beyond dimension, they were reset, and the moon was the reset mechanism, constant, predictable, emotional, lunar, because what better way to dull a species awakening than to pull at their dreams, their blood, their sleep. And yet, it hasn't worked, not completely, because here you are, awake, not fully, not loudly, but just enough to notice the hum in ancient temples, the impossible geometry of the pyramids, the resonance in caves and stones, in names long erased, and enough to start singing the song of before, softly, quietly, like a lullaby hummed by stars. You sit now, wherever you are, in your room, your car, your bed. The lights are low. The world outside is still trying to sell you certainty timelines, concrete facts, but your bones know better. They remember the tone from Derinkuyu, the whisper from the Sphinx, the alignment at Kailash, the breath beneath Petra. You feel it in your breath, in your heart rate, in Thene, in the air between thoughts. This journey you've been on, it was never about proof. It was about permission, to question, to feel, to remember. Because if enough of us do, If enough of us start humming the old frequencies, aligning with stone and soil and sky, the moon's grip might not loosen, but it might not matter, because we'll remember how to walk through the world awake, even in a dream, especially in a dream. And that's the secret, isn't it? The moon was never your enemy. It was your mirror, waiting to see if you'd recognize your reflection, waiting to see if you'd sing back. And now you are. So rest, old traveler, not in ignorance, in knowing the hum is growing, the signal is rising, and you're already a part of it. The hum doesn't fade, it changes. It softens into something warmer, deeper, more personal, like a memory surfacing just before sleep. You feel it more than hear it, like the pulse of the planet syncing with the slow beat of your own breath. You're no longer in a specific place now. You're in every place, because the map you've been walking wasn't made of continents or coordinates. It was made of patterns, echoes of a civilization that never really disappeared. It simply stepped out of view, out of sync, out of time, but not out of existence. You're in the space between the ruins now, the space between what history calls primitive and what memory calls divine. And rising around you are the final whispers of that lost frequency. You see it in the architecture temples that were not built but tuned. Stones that aligned with the stars, not because it was beautiful, but because it was functional. They weren't monuments. They were machines, harmonic engines meant to interact with the body, the earth, the sky, and the soul. You feel it in the language symbols that weren't phonetic but vibrational. Glyphs designed to trigger inner knowing, like codes from a system long since buried beneath dust and doctrine. You remember it in the stories of beings who taught, not ruled, who guided, not demanded, who left not in fire or war, but in silence, in intention, in resonance. You begin to suspect that they're still here, not in some alien craft, not hiding under the sea, but within us, in our cells, in our dreams, in the places we can't quite explain. Gut feelings, déjà vu, the sudden ache of familiarity when you walk through a place you've never been. What if all of this, every temple, every myth, every impossibly aligned ruin, was part of a reintegration protocol, a breadcrumb trail across time? A reminder encoded into matter, sound, and sacred geometry. And what if we're finally beginning to respond because something is rising? It's not a nation. It's not a movement. It's a memory. You hear it in the way people are drawn to ancient places with no logical explanation. The urge to stand barefoot in stone circles, to hum inside pyramids, to cry while walking alone through Petra, to press your forehead against the earth and listen. It's not tourism, it's tuning. We are tuning ourselves, waking up not all at once, but like the sun, one beam at a time, across different faces of the world. And the moon, maybe it knows. Maybe it always knew this moment would come. Maybe that's why it was placed there, not as a prison, but as a test, a soft lock, a gravitational challenge to see who would fall back asleep and who would remember how to fly. You sit beneath that same moon, now no longer suspicious, but curious. You ask it not with words, but with presence. What are you? And in return, it shows you, not a machine, not a god, a mirror, reflecting the consciousness of a world still learning to recognize itself. It's not keeping you in. It's waiting for you to grow through it. Because all these places, Atlantis, Mu, Derinkuyu, Nazca, the Sphinx, the mountain, the moon, they're not the beginning or the end. They're the feedback loop. And you're the variable that changes the equation. You stand, and for the first time, you don't feel like a traveler. You feel like a carrier, of tone, of memory, of the song that came before. You hum it now, not out loud, but from somewhere below your ribs. And you know that something ancient just heard you. Something that never stopped listening. And maybe it smiles, and maybe it weeps, because finally, you're humming the tune again. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Enough to ripple through the system, enough to activate the stones, enough to shake the simulation just a little. And that's how remembering begins, not with an explosion, but with a resonance. You exhale, and it's not just breath, it's a release. Like a frequency leaving your body after lifetimes of storage. And in that space, left behind, silence. But not the empty kind. The kind that waits. The kind that listens. You've reached the final turn of the spiral now. And somehow, it feels like you've been here before. Not just in this life, in all of them. Because the journey you've taken tonight isn't one of information. It's one of alignment. You didn't just explore lost civilizations. You remembered them. And now, one last question lingers quiet and enormous. What now? What do you do with this knowledge? The whispers of pre-moon cultures, the echoes of buried tones, the suspicion that this world is not what it claims to be. Do you try to warn people? Do you retreat into doubt? Or do you do what those ancient ones always did when the tone began to fade? You tune in. Because here's the final secret. You don't need ruins to remember. You are the temple. Your body is stone and star and salt. It hums with the same harmonic ratios as the pyramids, the cathedrals, the forgotten mountain altars. You were built with memory in your bones and starlight in your spine. And you know it, even if the world calls you crazy. Even if the simulation doubles down on distraction, you feel it in the way certain names make your skin buzz, in the way certain places tug at your soul like a half-remembered lullaby, in the way your dreams don't feel like dreams anymore. They feel like instructions. You are remembering, not all at once. That would be too much. But steadily, in pulses, like the moon itself is losing its grip one cycle at a time. You look back on where you've been, the sunken cities that chose to drown, the temples built not to house gods but to become them, the ancient engineers who built with frequency instead of force, the sacred mountains that taught people to orbit truth, not conquer it. The stone circles the buried domes, the stars reflected in ruins, and in every place, the same message repeated in different languages, symbols, tones. You've done this before. You've walked this earth in gold skin, in bone cloaks, in silence. You've lit fires in temples that no longer exist. You've hummed tones into caves, painted spirals on stone walls, danced star maps into dust. And now you've circled back, this time with pixels and podcasts and pressure. But the song is still there, underneath it all, waiting for you to join. And maybe this time it will be different. Because the old ones didn't just leave ruins. They left contingencies, fail-safes, triggers, keys. And you are one of them. Not chosen, not superior, just ready. Ready to hold the tone, to walk the lines, to remember with your feet, your hands, your eyes, until your presence itself becomes a form of remembrance. So what now? You listen, you walk slowly, you pay attention to what moves when nothing should move. You follow the pull, the hum, the flicker of recognition that rises in your chest when something is right. And above all else, you stay kind. Because if the old world fell to anything, it wasn't war or water or fire. It was forgetting how to care, how to listen, how to harmonize. And if we're to rebuild even quietly, even just in ourselves, We must do it in resonance with the heart, the earth, and each other. You take one final breath, deep, present. You feel the moon above you, not as jailer, as witness. You feel the earth below you, not as ground, as memory. You feel yourself, not as seeker, as signal. And you know, this is not the end of the story. It's the first note in a new verse. Soft, clear, ancient, yours,